Shadow Slave. Chapter 126 to 126, Effie. 1214 words. Neffy stared at them for a few moments, then turned her head to Cassie and said, "Follow behind us." The three of them cautiously approached the entrance to the tower and lingered there, uncertain of how they should proceed. In their minds, there were two outcomes to this unexpected situation. 1. The mysterious young woman would turn out to be local awakened. In that case, all their problems were going to be solved. If unawakened happened to meet a group of sleepers in the wild reaches of the dream realm, it was customary to guide them to the nearest human citadel. Of course, exceptions happened, but in general, awakened strived to take care of sleepers. In this alien land, humans had to band together. It was not only a moral obligation, but also in their own best interest. 2. The stranger would turn out to be nightmare creature. In that case, they were going to have a tough fight on their hands. Since the rank and class of the enemy were unknown, it was impossible to predict the result. They just had to risk it. Drawing a deep breath, Sunny followed Neffys into the cool darkness of the tower. Immediately, the appetizing smell of roasting meat hit his nostrils. His stomach growled, "Crap." Before Sunny could react, a piece of bone flew past his head and hit the wall with enough force to shatter into tiny pieces. Belatedly, he raised the midnight shard and assumed a defensive stance. But it was a little too late. The young woman had already been alerted of their presence. Raising her head, she bared her teeth in a wide grin and murmured, "Is someone hiding in the shadows? Why didn't you come out to play?" Her voice was deep, smoky and had RSP huskiness to it. But what mattered the most was that she was speaking in the human language. She was human, probably. The stranger was still sitting in a relaxed pose, but Sunny didn't miss the subtle tension in her carved muscles. He had no doubt that the alleged awakened could explode into a whirlwind of violence at any moment. It was better not to provoke her. Glancing at Neff, he followed her example and dismissed his sword. Then, the three of them hesitantly stepped into the circle of light cast by the bonfire. The young woman looked at them in surprise and raised her eyebrows. Humans, huh, unexpected. Then she smiled and shook her head. "Ah, where are my manners?" With that, she lightly rose to her feet. The white fabric off her tunic shifted slightly, revealing even more of her toned, powerful thighs. Sunny blinked. He had assumed that the stranger was tall, but only now did he realize how imposing her true height was. The woman stood considerably taller than even Neffy's, not to mention Sunny himself. Complete with her robust physique, olive skin and archaic armor, she looked like an ancient goddess. Craning his neck to look her in the eyes was sort of irritating, though. But Sunny had no choice. If he were to just look straight, his line of sight would land directly on her shapely, The young woman, meanwhile, wiped her dirty face with a forearm and gestured at the fire. "Here, would you like to take a seat?" Despite the polite invitation, they hesitated. After several seconds passed in awkward silence, Neffys finally took a step forward and asked the question that had been tormenting all three of them. With her voice uncharacteristically tense and full of suppressed emotion, she cautiously said, Are you human?" The stranger stared at her with a blank expression, then blinked a couple of times. "What else would I? A horse." With that, she threw her head back and laughed loudly, amused by her own silly joke. Neffys and Sunny glanced at each other, confused as to what Toto. Meanwhile, the young woman giggled a few more times and looked at them with sparks of glee dancing in her eyes. "Of course I am human. Why are you even asking? Anyway, come sit. My neck is tired from looking down on you." With that, she sat down near the fire and assumed a relaxed pose. Neffys, Sunny and Cassie finally approached and lowered themselves to the stones, looking at the tall girl with hungry flames burning in their eyes. She looked them over, then frowned a little. "Haven't seen you guys around. Are you new?" Neffys gave her a nod. "Yes, we have just reached the city." She was trying very hard to act like a normal, well-adjusted person. It seemed that her endless attempts to improve her social skills had not been in vain. If Sunny didn't know how awkward and clumsy Neff's natural state was, he wouldn't have suspected anything. The young woman grinned. "In that case, my condolence. Wait, you guys survived for 2 whole months in the labyrinth." She whistled and looked at them with newfound respect. "That's a real feat. Congratulations." Neffys lingered for a few seconds, then said, "Inefis, and these are my companions, Cassia and Sunless. We're sleepers who came here during the winter solstice." The young woman gave them a wide, friendly smile. "Nice to meet you. I'm Effie. Well, at least that's what people call me. I'm also a sleeper." Sunny frowned. Sub-beautiful giantess was not an awakened, just a sleeper like them. Strangely, he didn't remember ever seeing her in the academy. Still, too impatient to remain silent, he leaned forward and said, "Are you from the castle? There are people living there, right?" Effie glanced at them. In her eyes, there was a hinto fast strange emotion. It almost looked like pity. There are indeed people living in the castle, yes. Neffys and Sunny exchanged excited looks. Then, Changing Star cautiously asked, "Can you take us there?" Effie shrugged. "Sure, no problem. Do you guys have shards?" Sunny blinked. What did soul shards have Toto with any of this? They had retrieved 2 from that weird stone he had killed at the base of the wall. Was she going to ask for payment? Neffys retrieved the soul shards and showed them to the tall girl. "We have 2. Effie sighed. "Only 2? Well, it's better than nothing, I guess. Keep them. You'll need them later." Not quite understanding the meaning of her words, Changing Star lingered, then said uncertainly, "We were hoping to reach the citadel and access the gateway as soon as possible. How long will it take?" The young woman stared at them for a long time, and then suddenly bent over in a fit of hysterical laughter. She laughed so long and hard that tears soon appeared in the corners of her eyes. Unpleasantly surprised, the 3 sleepers stared at her in shock. None of them understood the reason for this bizarre behavior. Is she insane? Sunny frowned, re-evaluating the situation. Previously, the local girl just seemed a bit eccentric. But maybe there was more to it. Effie Slaughter stopped as abruptly as that started. Wiping her tears, she shook her head and said in a strange tone, "Sorry guys, I just couldn't help myself. Please, forgive my lack of manners." Then, she straightened her back, looked them heavily into the eyes, and said, "I can take you to the castle, but there is no gateway there. In fact, there's no way out of this cursed hell at all. I've been stuck here for 3 years myself already. So, welcome to the Dark City, I guess. Abandon hope all you ho enter here, and all that. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 127 to 127. Abandon all hope. 1184 words. Shell-shocked by her words, the three of them stared at the young woman with pale faces. Sunny felt something brittle and precious shattering in his heart, piercing it with an almost physical feeling of pain. No, it can't be. It just couldn't be true. How could all of this have been for nothing? How could all of his hopes, dreams and desires just be destroyed with a couple of words? How was it possible? Somewhere beside him, Cassie suddenly said in a tiny voice. What do you mean, there is no gateway? Effie shrugged. It's very simple, really. I'm sorry Tobethy wanted to break it to you, but deep down inside you must have known already. Didn't you? The Forgotten Shore, it's not really a place where humans are supposed to survive. Patsy, you have never heard of anything like it in the school or the academy. Sunny's face got contorted with anger. Of course, the answer was always within his grasp. He was just too naive and foolish to grasp it. The dream realm was vast and strange, with most OFITS regions barely explored by humans. However, there was at least a small amount of information available about them. Some were even fully under human control, with large citadels like Bastion providing shelter to hundreds of thousands of awakened. And yet, when he had first come to the Forgotten Shore, Sunny didn't recognize any of the unique characteristics of this place. At the time, he had thought that his patchy education was to blame. He should have realized the truth when neither Neffys nor Cassie managed to succeed where he had failed. Why would a region as unique as his one be utterly unknown? The most logical explanation would bet that no one had ever returned from this deadly abyss to the real world to tell others about it. What a fool he was. Just a few weeks in the comfortable life in the academy, and he had completely forgotten that the world never played fair against people like him. The truth was always worse than his worst expectations, so he would this time be any different. The world was a predator that always waited for an opportunity to devour you. Why would he even expect anything else? A familiar bitter taste appeared in his mouth. Meanwhile, Effie continued in a gentle tone. 15 years ago or so, a group of powerful and desperate sleepers managed to reach the city and claim the castle for themselves. Not because it had a gateway, but because it was the only place that could keep them safe. At least for a while. Ever since then, a few lucky or resourceful people would find their way to the castle each solstice, only to get stuck here with the rest Ofus. Neffys was sitting quietly, with only her clenched fists betraying the storm of emotions raging in her heart. Cassie was taking the news harder than both of them, though. After all, it was her vision that led them into this trap. Her face was deathly pale, with an expression of pain and shock contorting its delicate lines. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "But that is not fair." Effie looked at her with pity. Then, she chuckled, smiled darkly and said, "When was anything ever fair?" She was right, of course. Justice didn't really exist outside of the ethereal realm of human imagination. Sunny had learned that lesson a long time ago. While he was stewing in his indignant despair, Effie's smile suddenly lost its grim undertone and turned into a happy grin once again. Leaning forward a little, she said, "But it's not all bad. At least you have met me. You guys are incredibly lucky, really. If you hadn't run into a local, you would have been dead already." Neffy stared at her and asked in a flat tone, "Yeah, why is that?" Her awkward manner of speech was back again in all its glory. Effie sighed. The Dark City is simultaneously the safest place to be on the Forgotten Shore, and also the deadliest. It is safe because no Zaya monster can cross the wall, let alone reach the castle. But at the same time, it is far more dangerous than the labyrinth because almost every nightmare creature here is of the fallen rank. Sunny blinked, feeling a cold shiver permeate his whole body. Fallen creatures were immeasurably more powerful than awakened ones. Dormant humans like them had no business fighting against the latter, let alone the former. One awakened demon was already more than they could handle without resorting to summoning a true terror from the depths of the cursed sea. Something much more powerful than the carapace demon would simply wipe them out from existence in a matter of seconds. Remembering countless shapes moving through the ruins, Heck couldn't help but tremble. Was each of those shapes a fallen monster? How would anyone survive even a day in this cursed city? They would have Tobine Saint Toyev and try. Slowly, the magnitude of the perilous trap they had found themselves in began to seep into his mind. Effie smiled, "But you guys managed to stumble into me before descending from the wall. Otherwise, the fallen ones would have been feasting on your souls already." Lucky, very lucky. There are very few people in the castle who go out hunting in the ruins, let alone venture so far away from it. Meeting an experienced hunter like May was probably your only chance to avoid finding out about the true face of the Dark City a second too late. She shook her head. That's, like, 1 to 1,000, 10,000, a million. At any rate, the odds were really not in your favor. Fortune is definitely in love with at least one of you, guys. So, cheer up. Do you want some meat? I had a truly amazing hunt today. It was so amazing that I didn't even mind sharing. Neffys didn't even look at the roasting meat and instead leaned forward, her words filled with intensity. If there is no gateway here, why didn't you try to leave? Effie blinked a couple of times and looked at her with sincere confusion. Quote ... Leave, and go here. The meat was about to become burnt, so she leaned to the fire and removed the skewers, then replaced them with a couple of new ones. Then, with a sigh, she turned to Changing Star and said, "You've been to the labyrinth, so you know what it's like. There's nothing else but that damn coral and cursed sea for months of travel in every direction. You can coon food, you can swim, you can even fly, because there are swarms of dreadful flying abominations hiding in the clouds. But try to leave. Yeah, many have tried. They're all dead now. Actually, that is show the initial master of the castle had perished." Sunny gritted his teeth. "So, what, you guys just hide in the castle and wait for death?" The beautiful young woman laughed. "Of course not, doofus." Then she pierced him with an unexpectedly grim look off her hazel eyes and said, "Most Ofus can't even get into the castle. The king demands his tax, you know. So just wait for death outside. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report." Shadow Slave. Chapter 128 to 128, King of the Hill. 1140 words. Sunny stared at her, trying to understand the meaning behind the strange words. "What do you mean?" Effie shrugged. "The castle belongs to a man named Gunlog. If you want to enter and live in the safety of the castle walls, protected and provided for by his hunters, you need to pay a tribute. 1 shard each week. Of course there was exploitation going on even in this pit of despair. What else did he expect? As long as there were people, someone was going to end Upaspri. Sunny sensed a familiar dark feeling rising up from the depths of his soul. At some point, he had lulled it into a slumber and forgotten it, but now it finally returned to its rightful place. A corner of his mouth curled up. What happens if you can pay the tribute? The huntress glanced at them with confusion. What do you think? You are not allowed to step anywhere near the gates. There's a small settlement for us unfortunate wretches beneath the castle walls, where we make do with what little we have and tremble in the night, hoping that nothing comes out of the darkness to devour us. That's pretty much it, he hesitated, but how are people even supposed to get soul shards in this cursed place? Effie gestured to the corpses of the monsters she had slain. By hunting, one can find awakened creatures here and there in the city. The trick is to find and kill them without stumbling into something far more deadly. Gunlogus people form parties and go out to hunt, with experienced pathfinders leading the way. They bring back food, memories, materials and shards. Nothing stops people from attempting the same. She fell silent for a few moments, and then said in a darker tone. Of course, without good memories, vast amounts of accumulated soul essence and intricate knowledge of the city, those people usually didn't live long. Most of them either die or turn to their ways of earning shards. There's very few independent hunters with more than a couple of successful hunts to their names. Ones that are still alive, I mean. Sunny glanced at the dead monsters, each of them large enough to give him pause. What about you? How many did you survive? Effie smiled. More than a couple. With a chuckle, she raised her hand and began folding fingers, a thoughtful expression on her face. Let's see, 1, 2, 5. Running out Offfinger's own hand, she scratched her head and said with avid oath uncertainly. I'm not really sure, but it should be around 100 or 2. Yeah, Sunny's eyes widened. 200. I thought Effie had said was true, then she was a force to be reckoned with. Slaying even one awakened creature was worthy of respect. Slaying hundreds of them, however, was nothing short of remarkable, perhaps even heroic, and a little fearsome. Especially since she had hunted them alone in the middle of a cursed ruin full of fallen abominations, unaided, with no one to rely on except for herself. The easygoing huntress was not as simple as he appeared. Hef frowned. If this is true, then you should have had no problem paying the tribute to stay in the castle. This doesn't make sense. Why haven't you? Effie shrugged with ambivalence. The topic didn't seem to interest her. Let's just say that I didn't like the ambiance there. Sunny wanted to learn more, but suddenly, Neffy spoke again, her voice strangely tense. You said that there were other ways of earning soul shards. What are they? The huntress turned to her and was silent for a while, a hint of some dark emotion in her eyes. However, it was quickly erased by her usual laid-back smile. Well, there's safe ways. If you have useful utility ability, you can become a craftsman or on artifacts in the castle. There's not a lot of such sleepers, so they are well regarded and cared for. If not, there are other opportunities, too. Boys can become gunlog soldiers, while girls can enter his harem. Pretty ones like the two of you especially. No one will force you, of course. Neffy scowled. Sunny could see white sparks dancing in her eyes. So, you can either become his soldier, his servant, his plaything, or D. But that is, your own choice. No one is forcing anyone to do anything. Of course, Effie grinned. Smart girl, you get it. Changing Star looked down, her indifferent face turning hard and cold. Her fists were clenched so hard that they seemed bloodless. So he hasn't killed him yet. The huntress laughed. Kill Gunlog. Oh, many have tried. Great people, terrible people, and everyone in between. You can see their skulls above the castle gate, actually. She shook her head. I like your train of thought, princess, but you should forget it. Just consider him to be immortal. He practically is. Believe me when I say that no sleeper can defeat Gunlog, ever. It's simply impossible. Effie sighed. Plus, no matter how much I hate the bastard, he is the only thing that holds this place together. Despicable Ash Ice, without him, we would have all been dead already. Sunny watched Neffy's, waiting to see her reaction. What he saw did not make him happy at all. On her beautiful ivory face, there was nothing but cold indifference and resolve. It was the same expression he had seen on it before the battle with the Carapace Centurion first, and the Carapace Demon later. Without even needing Cassie's prophetic ability, he could easily imagine what was going on in her head. This is going to become a problem. Asked how sensing the same thing, Effie grimaced. No, seriously, trying to go against Gunlaw will only get you killed. If you're lucky, didn't even think about that. Thinking too much is not good for your health here in the Dark City, anyway. Then, she smiled and gestured to the fire. Just have some of this delicious meat instead. Life is good when your stomach is full, right? Let me tell you, this is most likely your last chance to eat anything for free. Food is a real rarity in these parts. Can you believe it? Sunny sighed, then leaned forward and picked up a sizzling piece of meat. No matter what happened, they had to keep going. One step at a time. This was the only way to survive. Of course I can believe it. I'm from the outskirts, you know. I didn't even know what real meat smells like before entering the academy. With that, he handed the piece of meat to Cassie, took another one, and began devouring it greedily. Neffy's lingered for Abbott, but then followed his example. Effie giggled. That's the spirit. See, Doofus gets it. It seemed asked how Changing Star had listened to her advice. At least on the surface, she had accepted that defeating the current master of the castle was impossible. But Sunny knew that, deep down inside, she remained unconvinced. After all, Neffy's was in the habit of making impossible things happen. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 129 to 129, Solace. 1,185 words. After the shocking revelation about the cruel futility of their long and arduous journey to the Dark City, the desire to reach the promised castle that kept the three of them going for so long had diminished significantly. However, they still wanted to get there as soon as possible. There was a tiny remnant of hope still burning in Sunny's heart. Perhaps Effie was lying to them, or wrong about everything. Somehow, he didn't really believe it, though. The beautiful huntress seemed sincere and competent, if a little eccentric. More than that, her words made too much sense. But Effie wasn't in a rush to leave the granite tower. There's not enough daylight left to traverse that much distance. Moving through the ruins is a slow ordeal. Get comfortable and rest. We'll leave tomorrow at dawn. After that, she got busy dressing down the monster carcasses with a long knife that appeared in her hand. She even summoned a memory that looked like a leather apron to avoid getting blood on her tunic. Whistling an upbeat melody under her nose, the vigorous young woman looked like an enthusiastic gourmet chef. Nephews, Sunny and Cassie were in a mood to talk. Each of them sat somberly by themselves, trying to digest the awful reality of their new situation. Sunny was utterly disheartened. Hefeld asked how someone had pulled the batteries out of his body, leaving him with no strength or desire to do anything. The world had become dim and tiresome. Thought a shop for you. He didn't even have enough motivation to get angry. It was asked how he had run an exhausting marathon and crossed the finish line, only to find out that there was another race waiting for him on the other side. In fact, he would have to keep running forever. He would never meet Master Jet and Teacher Julius again to thank them for the advice and teachings that had helped him survive, and maybe even repay their kindness. He would never become an awakened and learn more mysteries of his strange aspect. Most importantly, his dreams of becoming rich and spending the rest of his life in comfort were also not meant to be. Which hurt the most. Figures. Crestfallen, he made an effort to find some semblance of solace in this disastrous fiasco. Well, if you think about it, I'm still alive. That has to be worth something, right? His shadow glanced at them, not entirely convinced. Plus, I can easily stay alive for the foreseeable future. Yeah, the big picture changed for the worst, but our immediate situation has actually improved a lot. We're safe from the constant threat of drowning or being devoured by the dwellers of the deep dark sea. We have also found a strong community of humans. No matter how things were run in the castle, there were hundreds of people living there. Numbers and experience meant everything in the dream realm. Vibe coming apart of a human collective, they were going toshed most of the burdens that had been silently crushing them all this time. Compared to the infernal gauntlet of the labyrinth, life in the castle was going to be like a dream. If they were willing to submit to its thug of a master, of course. If Sunny was alone, he probably would. Now, however, but even if they were Torfews, there was still the outer settlement. Effie seemed to be doing just fine as an independent hunter. She didn't even seem miserable. In fact, she might just be the most contented person I've ever seen. Seriously, how can she be so laid back and cheerful? Is she insane? Heck, a sidelong glance at the unreasonably tall huntress and frowned. Well, let's ponder about it. She has a roof over her head and a limitless supply of delicious food, provided that she hunts it down herself. That is already better than my life in the outskirts. Come to think about it, remaining in the Dark City for the rest of his life was not how he had envisioned his future, but it was not that different from struggling to survive in the slums of the real world. Actually, in a lot of senses, it was way better. So, maybe, the situation seemed to be so bad not because it actually was, but because it simply didn't fit his inflated expectations. Perhaps Effie didn't expect anything from life at all, and that's why she was so damn happy and lively even in the middle of this odious hell. Yeah, that must bait. Problem solved. Easy. The shadow shook its head and turned away. Sunny sighed. Despite his somewhat rational attempt to find the bright side in this calamity, he didn't feel any better at all. In fact, thinking about how inescapable and bleak their future was only made him more tired. Suddenly, his skin crawled. The familiar sensation of dread and unease flooded his mind, only now, it was so much more profound and invasive. The shadow of the Crimson Spire had fallen on the Dark City. Soon, the sound of waves crashing against stone informed them of the coming of night. Not in the mood to even stand up, Sunny silently sent his shadow to take a look outside. As last rays of the falling sun colored the world in the shades of red, the cursed sea was surging out of the great crater. Sunny watched as distant statue of the beautiful faceless woman was slowly drowned by the darkness, until only her open hand remained above the waves. Then, he shifted his gaze and looked down. The undulating black surface of the cursed sea stopped mere meters beneath the edge of the granite wall. It seemed asked how he could almost touch it with his hand. On the other side of the stone barrier, the ruined city lay submerged in shadows, dozens of meters below the water level. Trapped between the endless expanse of the dark sea and the vast emptiness of the ruins, the mighty wall seemed to be than a saw sheet of paper. And yet, it silently withstood the crushing pressure of the black waves, serving a sodom that protected the city below from being erased by the terrible flood, just like it for thousands of years. However, Sunny couldn't help but imagine all that crushing weight bursting through the collapsing wall in an all-consuming torrent of darkness. He felt shivers running down his spine. Commanding his shadow to return, Sunny finally forced himself to stand up and walked over to Neffy's. Changing Star was sitting with her back against the wall, a dark expression on her face. Hearing his footsteps, she raised her eyes. Sunny sat down beside her, lingered for a while, and then said, "What do you think?" She was silent for a long time, simply looking at them with an inexorable expression. Just when he was about to think that there would be no answer, Neff finally spoke. As he did, white sparks ignited in the depths of her cold gray eyes. "We will find a way to return. No matter what has to be done, we will." Her words echoed inside the granite tower, making shadows on the walls dance in sinister glee. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 130 to 130, Strength of a Dozen Men. 999 words. In the morning, they set out for the castle. Before leaving the safe haven of the granite tower, Effie gave them a list of instructions. Follow behind me. Listen to everything I say. Didn't make any noise. Didn't bleed. Didn't think too much. Some of the creatures out there can hear noisy thoughts, others can sense strong emotions. So didn't feel fear, either. Sunny stared at her with a grim expression. How was he supposed to control what he feels? The vigorous huntress grinned. What, you never tried to solve math equations in your head to impress a lovely lady? Just that same. As Sunny's cheeks began to turn bright red, she giggled and turned to Cassie and Neff. Correction. The two of you, try not to feel fear. Doofus, you try not to get too excited. If walking behind me turns out to too much, ask to get slapped, alright. Sunny scowled and uttered through gritted teeth. That won't be problem. Effie blinked a couple of times, then smiled. Ah, playing for the other team. I see. What was that supposed to mean? Trying to get his emotions under control, Sunny took a deep breath and counted Toten. Math equations my ass, who does she think she is? Wait, why am I counting? Making sure that they understood her instructions, the huntress turned around and rolled the massive slab of granite that blocked the exit from the tower to the side. Lean muscles tensed and moved under her olive skin, making for a picturesque view. Sunny stared at her back and gulped. That slab of granite had Toei a couple oftens, at least. How strong was the beautiful giantess, exactly? Catching a glimpse of his stare, Effie raised an eyebrow and winked. Like what you see, he answered on autopilot. Yes, wait, no. I mean, that's not why I was looking. How are you that strong? She glanced at the granite slab, then at them. Oh, that's respectability. It's a strong all-around physical enhancement. That was, a very rare and powerful ability to have. While not as flashy as many others, it was practically the ultimate warrior ability. With not only her strength but also her speed, agility, endurance and resilience boosted, Effie was like one of those ancient heroes Neff sometimes talked about. Especially since that boost seemed so extravagant. Plus, she had most likely absorbed a very large amount of soul essence over the years of hunting monsters in the Dark City. All those shards the recalcitrant huntress refused to pay as tribute to the tyrannical lord of the castle had to geo somewhere. But why would she just admit what her ability was? Sharing secrets like that was not a wise thing, Toto, especially not in the ruthless reality of the Forgotten Shore. Noticing his surprise, Effie grinned. What? It's not like it's a great mystery. Around here, anyone with a pair of eyes knows what my ability can do. Do you want me to tell you what my flaw is? Well, there was a mischievous glint in her eyes. Yeah, right, a Stephanie one ice insane enough to share there. It's very simple. My aspect not only enhances all my physical attributes, it also does the same with all my physical needs. Why do you think I ate enough meat to create a literal pile of gnawed bones, for the fun of it? She laughed and shook her head. Well, it was fun, not gonna lie. Sub price for having the strength of many men was to have the hunger of many men, as well. Out here in the Dark City, where food was scarce and hard to come by, it was a dangerous flaw to possess. It was a curse that could force a person to hunt more, and therefore risk injury and death more than anyone else would have to. Most people would scoff at its severity, but not Sunny. Heck knew what hunger, real hunger, felt like. What it could do to a person. Perhaps that was the reason why Effie was out here in the first place. Perhaps she had become a huntress not because she wanted to, but because she simply didn't have a choice. What other physical needs do people have? Sunny thought, a little confused. Air, then water and food, then, Hey, I said not to get excited. Sunny flinched and looked up at Effie, who was staring at them and cackling. Embarrassed, he gritted his teeth in anger. Didn't flatter yourself, Beanpole. However, when he noticed that Neffys and Cassie were observing them with amusement clearly written on their faces, his anger somewhat subsided. Belatedly, Sunny realized that, perhaps, the experienced huntress had been joking around with him not just out of pure mischief. Perhaps she was trying to lighten the mood to get them into the right mental state, thus making traversing the cursed city less perilous. Meanwhile, Effie grinned. What? No answer. Sunny glared at her and said, didn't distract me. Then he forcefully changed the flow of his thoughts and reluctantly added, I'm solving equations. A minute later, they left the granite tower and stepped onto the streets of the Dark City. Effie had summoned the helmet off her archaic armor before venturing forth. It was of the Corinthian design, with a tall crest of blue horsehair and a narrow visor that left only her eyes and lips exposed. On her back, there was a leather bag containing the meat, bones, and hides of the monsters she had slain during the hunt. Sunny knew for a fact that this bag was much larger on the inside than it seemed from the outside, otherwise, in order to accommodate all Ophepstrophes, it would have had to be comically big. However, it still weighed way too much for an ordinary person to carry. Including the armor, the long knife, and the black leather apron, it was the fourth memory he had seen the huntress summon. He wondered how many more did she have in her arsenal. He had yet to see what weapons Effie used. In the ghostly light of early dawn, they entered the cursed ruins. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 131 to 131, Traversing the Dark City. 1124 words. The mournful ruins of the once great city sprawled around them like a desolate stone maze. With grey skies above and nothing but dead silence surrounding the cohort of 4 tent sleepers, it seemed as how they were walking through a vast, cyclopean graveyard. Sunny had to constantly remind himself that there were countless horrors hiding in the ominous shadows of the Dark City. One wrong turn could land them in dire peril. In this ancient ruin, they had no choice but to entrust their lives to the hands of their guide. Luckily, the guide in question was not a Moro's dead poet, but a tall, extremely attractive young woman clad in unpleasantly revealing archaic armor. In their current circumstances, Sunny much preferred the company of a warrior to that of a useless scribbler. In fact, circumstances had nothing to do with it. He was having trouble imagining any situation where a writer would be helpful to have around. From what Heck knew, all writers were lazy, talentless hacks whose only real skill was finagling money out of honest people while getting off on torturing them with sadistic cliffhangers. Not to mention that none of them had a backside like Effie. Wait, what? Getting his mind out of the gutter, Sunny frowned and reminded himself to keep his emotions in check. Anazance, this harsh necessity was ablissing. The perilous reality of the ruined city prevented them from concentrating on the bitter despair that had taken a stranglehold on their hearts after the grim revelation of the previous day. They just had to put one foot in front of the other and not think too much about anything. One step at a time, that was how he was going to survive. With a heavy sigh, Sunny glanced around and continued walking. Just like Effie had said, traversing the ruins turned out to be a slow ordeal. The huntress led them through the complex maze of wide and narrow streets following a strange, convoluted path that only she knew. Often, they would have to stop and hide, waiting for some unseen danger to pass. Sometimes they walked under the empty sky, sometimes they dove into the weathered buildings and spent some time crawling through the piles of rubble inside. Other times, Effie was able to lead them straight through half-collapsed houses to emerge into secluded alleyways on the other side. Once or twice, they had even climbed to the rooftops and proceeded forward by walking on precariously rickety tiles or red support beams, jumping across vast chasms and balancing on half-rotten planks of wood that had been placed there by someone to bridge especially wide gaps. During these moments, either Neff or Sunny would carry Cassie in their arms. Sunny was surprised to discover that the interiors of some buildings were incredibly well preserved. It was asked how the inhabitants had just left a few days ago, as opposed to the thousands of years that had passed in reality. Because of that, he was able to catch glimpses of how the citizens of this ancient city had lived all that time ago. It was a strange and eerie sight. He was also able to clearly understand that Effie indeed knew the ruins very well. Everywhere they went, there were signs of her previous visits and preparations. From the planks placed across the gaps between roofs to the heavy slabs of stone used to hide improvised passages, it was apparent that she had spent years of meticulous effort turning large parts of this lethal maze into her own private hunting grounds. He had gained a new respect for the seemingly carefree young woman. She almost made traveling through the cursed ruins look safe and easy. However, Heck knew that this couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, he suspected that death was constantly breathing down their necks, only barely held at bay by Effie's knowledge and timely judgment. Several freshly eviscerated carcasses that they had stumbled on served as a clear sign that Dark City was teeming with harrowing life. Even terrifying nightmare creatures were not safe here. More than once, they heard the distant sounds of claws scraping against stone, sensed the ground trembling under heavy footsteps, or noticed swift shadows falling through the clouds. In those moments, Effie would change their course on the fly or find a perfectly concealed hiding spot without fail. Meeting her had indeed been a rare stroke of luck. But with each hour that passed, Sunny grew increasingly somber. No matter what kind of future awaited them in this cursed place, he had no doubt that they would have to hunt for food as well. That meant that he was going to have to learn all the same things that Effie had learned, and maybe even more. The task seemed incredibly daunting. Huey isn't even sure that he would be able to accomplish it. At least Huey isn't going to do it by himself. There was changing star to partner with, and Cassie. Their presence calmed him down. Living in this terrible hell alone, he didn't even want to think about it. Such a wretched existence would surely kill him, and if not, at least drive him insane. At that point, he wouldn't wish to be alive anyway. Who would want to enter that kind of misery? Why think about something that is never going to happen? Glancing at Nephis and Cassie, Sunny hid a smile and hurried to catch up to Effie. Come to think about it, he had it way better than the recalcitrant huntress. There were reliable allies with whom he had forged bonds of trust and companionship at his side. The three of them made each other stronger. More than that, his own aspect was able to provide him with a similar comprehensive physical enhancement ability, albeit a lesser version of it. It was much more versatile, though, allowing him to transfer the enhancement effect onto memories and inanimate objects, not to mention his invaluable ability to move and scout around without being seen. Sunny would offer the services of his shadow to Effie, but Huey a censor about how safe that would be. If there were creatures in these ruins capable of sensing thoughts and emotions, what were the chances that some of them would be able to sense the gaze of the shadow as well? He would have to learn more and experiment before allowing it to wander around on its own. These thoughts had cheered him up a little. Soon, as sun began to fall toward the horizon, they had finally reached the base of the hill on which stood the magnificent castle. Sunny looked up, sensing his heart beating wildly. A heavy and anxious feeling took hold of his mind. Depending on what happened next, their fates were going to change forever, either for the better or for the worse. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 132 to 132, end of the line. 1,150 words. In the center of the cursed city, a tall hill towered above the ruins. At its base, an arch made of pristine white marble stood amidst the devastation. It was unscathed and spotless, as how protected from the entropic touch of the all-consuming darkness by some sublime force. Beyond the arch, a wide road paved with white stones scaled the hill. Sunny looked dubiously past beneath the arch, trying to imagine crowds of stively dressed people doing the same in the distant past. It was hard and a little heartbreaking thinking about how the ancient city must have looked before the mysterious calamity. Not turning her head, Effie said in a wistful tone, "There are areas in the ruins that many nightmare creatures tend to avoid for some reason. The castle is one of these places. I was told that back when the original group of sleepers came here hoping to carve a foothold in the city, there was only a single spire messenger nesting in the throne room, with no other monsters around. Those madmen actually managed to kill it." Neffis gave her a glance. Spire messenger. The huntress chuckled. "Big ugly bastards with black feathers and pale bodies, you must have seen them hunting in the labyrinth. They come from the spire." Changing Star hesitated. "What are their rank and class?" Effie shivered a little. "Fallen beasts. Patsy, I say that those guys were a little mad. But they were a powerful bunch." She grew silent and then added in a quiet voice. "It must have taken a lot to kill them, in the end." Brought into a solemn mood by that last statement, they continued forward insolence. The stone road coiled around the hill, slowly climbing its sheer slopes. Here and there, it was broken by long stretches of stairs and formidable but strangely graceful fortifications. No one was standing guard, though. The whole road was empty. Sunny gestured to one of the stone barricades and asked, "Why are there no watchmen?" Effie shrugged. "Gunlog has barely enough people to man the castle walls. They will notice anything that approaches the hill, though. The whole city ice and clear view from up there, and there are different protective measures put in place. They have already spotted us, too." Sunny shifted his body a little, not enjoying the feeling of being watched by some unseen, potentially dangerous strangers. After a long time walking up the coiling road of white stone, they finally reached the zenith of the hill and saw the mighty castle in all its glory. Up close, it looked even more magnificent. Built from the same pristine marble as arch at the base of the hill, it stretched into the sky like a white mountain made by human hands. The frontmost tower was wide and imposing, with a tall decorated gate and a grandiose staircase leading down from it to a vast stone platform that the road ended with. On both sides of the frontmost tower, brought slightly forth, two others stood as bastions, connected to it with arched aerial bridges and accompanied by smaller companion towers of their own. Behind them, the main keep soared even higher, Asthow trying to challenge the menacing crimson spire that loomed above the world far in the distance. Smaller towers, spires, and wings stood here and there, forming a complex and strangely harmonious formation. The whole structure was incredibly beautiful, striking, and at the same time radiated a feeling of unassailable firmness. It was asked how the castle was built for gods, not mortals. The only thing that spoiled the picture were dozens of human skulls hanging above the gates on rusty chains. Sunny grimaced, brought down to grim reality by this ghastly sight. His gaze fell lower, only now noticing dozens of crude, makeshift hovels huddled on the stone platform. They were built from fragments of rubble, rotting wood and pieces of monster hides, chaotically clinging to the stones as if afraid to be blown away by the wind. An unpleasant, strangely familiar smell hit him in the nose a few moments later. It was the motley, but unmistakable stench of the slums. That stench was nothing like the poisonous reek of the outskirts, and at the same time exactly the same. Sunny couldn't help but smile crookedly. Gee, I'm home. Between the hovels, gaunt and empty-eyed people were busy eking out their pitiful existences. They were dressed in a strange mix of dirty rags and shiny memories, with those wearing armor standing out among the rest like rare oddities. Most of them were extremely young, barely older than Sunny himself. Heck could smell their exhaustion and desperation even from where he was standing. Sunny really wanted Tola. After everything he had been through ever since becoming infected by the nightmare spell, the cycle had finally completed. He was right back to where he had started, only much worse off. Wasn't that the funniest thing ever? If this wasn't fate, then he didn't know what was. Oh, the irony. Changing Star voice tore him away from his reverie. Sunny, are you okay? He blinked a couple of times, then slowly turned to face her and said after a brief pause. Yeah, I was just reminiscing. Something in his voice must have sounded strange, because she gave him a long look before turning away with a short nod. Good, didn't relax just yet. Then, she turned to Effie and asked, what do now? The huntress looked around and shrugged. It is going to get dark soon, so I would advise you to find a shelter before that. Look around for an empty hut. With how many people die each season, there's always plenty of those. Otherwise, 2 of you can pay the tribute and go into the castle. But the third one will have to stay. Changing Star lingered, then said, what about you? Effie grinned. What about me? That luxury 1-bedroom cottage over there is mean. Mind you, it was built from the best kind of crap you can find here, although it's still crap. Anyway, I am going home, preparing myself a hearty supper and then going to sleep. I'm dead tired from these last couple of days. Sorry, I didn't toss guests. Neffy stared at her, obviously wanting to say more, but then simply nodded. I see. Thank you for everything you have done for us. I won't forget it. Effie smiled, patted her on the shoulder and turned to Sunny and Cassie. Bye, doofus. Bye, doll. See you around. With that, she began whistling a cheerful melody and walked away. The 3 of them were suddenly left alone, lost and unsure about what to do. The inhabitants of the outer settlement didn't pay them a lot of attention, only occasionally throwing an indifferent glance at the 3 young strangers. Only Cassie's beauty attracted a couple of intense, darkly fascinated gazes. After a minute or so passed in disoriented silence, Changing Star hesitantly took out the 2 soul shards that they had collected from the remains of the rolling stone and looked at the glimmering crystals lying in her hand. They had to make a decision. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 133 to 133, Farewell. 1,172 words. Neffys held the shimmering crystals, looking at them with a heavy expression. Sunny was also staring at the shards, his head full of dark thoughts. The remnants of shattered souls glowed softly in the dim twilight of dusk. Around them, the inhabitants of the outer settlement were hurrying to get inside their pitiful hovels before the coming of night. The sun was already hidden behind the cyclopean silhouette of the crimson spire, drowning the world in its eerie shadow. The air was full of fear and worry. He grimaced. What are you thinking about? Changing Star sighed and looked up. Her ivory face was harsh and thoughtful. She remained silent for a while, and then said in her usual calm tone. We need to split up. Sunny couldn't help but laugh. You do know what usually happens when people split up in these kinds of situations, right? She stared at them with no humor in her cold, gray eyes. This is not a drama, Sunny. We have the means to provide 2 Ofus with food and shelter for a week. There's no reason to pass on this opportunity. Cassie turned to her, a confused expression on her face. But what about the third? An uncomfortable silence hung between them, broken only by the whistling wind. Sunny looked at the blind girl, then at Neffys, and finally glanced at himself. Which one of them was going to remain hungry in the bitter cold while the other 2 would be eating their fill in the comfortable safety of the castle? He thought that he had an inkling. What else did I expect? It was less than 10 minutes since they reached the human civilization. Well, whatever passed for one in this loathsome purgatory, and the tentative connection that had been established between them in the crucible of the labyrinth was already coming apart at the seams. Just as Shahad expected, the nature of their relationship was going to change now that they weren't essentially the last 3 people in the whole wide world, with no one else truly on but each other. Was it strong enough to endure without that desperate need? Huey a censor. Throughout his whole life, Sunny had never managed to last long in any group. He didn't know if this time was going to be any different. Just as his insecurity threatened to break out of control, Neffy sighed and handed him the soul shards. Here, take Cassie inside. He stared at her hand, then looked up sharply. A strange storm of emotions erupted in his heart. There was surprise, joy, concern, but at the same time, irrationally, a dark sense of shame and resentment. Not knowing how to deal with all these feelings, he scowled and asked. Why me? Changing Star simply raised an eyebrow. Shaking his head, Sunny offered her a crooked smile and added. Don't get me wrong, I'm not refusing. I'm just curious, why are you so keen all Fasadin? Is it out of some misguided sense of nobility? Neffys looked at them for a while, and then said with indifference. I have never been noble. I have never been kind. He blinked, struggling with the desire to pinch Neff and make sure that she was awake. Had she met herself? If she wasn't noble, then who was? Meanwhile, Changing Star shrugged and looked away. Ida's simply the best choice. Right now, we need information the most. With the help of the shadow, you will be able to learn much more about what is going on in the castle than I ever would. While you are gathering information inside, I will do the same here. We will meet in a week, share our findings, and decide what to do next. Sunny just stared at her. Did Neff just reveal herself to be cynically pragmatical Ashwas? Once again, he felt a weird mix of emotions. He was simultaneously elated and hurt by her lack of sentiment. However, the fact that she simply assumed that they were going to continue working together, asked how it was a given, had not avoided his attention. For some reason, this small detail gave Sunny a warm feeling. Neffys looked at them and added. Besides, the terms for trade have come to an end. Your promise was to give upon your share of spoils on the way to the castle. Well, here where, that stone creature was your kill, so the shards are yours by right. Trade? What trade? Oh, yeah, the trade he had made with changing Star to get her to teach him swordsmanship and hide the fact that he had no way to absorb soul shards. He has almost forgotten about it. But she didn't. Now that Sunny had been reminded of its existence and realized that it was over, he felt a sudden pang of regret. It was asked how one of the few strings that connected them together had been suddenly severed. With ASIGH, he took the soul shards from her hand and gripped them tightly. Alright, then, I'll meet you in a week, I guess. Sunny opened his mouth, wishing to say something else, but then just turned away. Stepping aside, he gave the girls some privacy to say their goodbyes. Soon, Cassie's delicate hand found his shoulder. Sunny glanced at the blind girl, remained silent for a bit, and then asked. Are you ready? She hesitated before answering. When she did, there was a hint of sadness in her voice. Yes. With that, they walked away and left Neffys behind, standing alone in the surging darkness of the descending night. Guiding the blind girl, Sunny approached the grand stairs that led to the ornate gates of the magnificent marble castle. Out here, there was nothing but the howling of the wind and the encroaching veil of darkness. It seemed asked how the dwellers of the slum were not allowed to build their hovels on the wide stretch of stone that separated the marble steps from the outer settlement. Be careful, there are steps ahead. After warning Cassie, he sensed a cold feeling grasp his heart. For some reason, it felt asked how once he stepped on these stairs, there would be no way back. Gritting his teeth, Sunny took a step forward and began his ascent to the castle. Soon, they approached the apex and stopped in front of a couple of unfriendly guards. Both of the young men barring their way wore armor-type memories and wielded their weapons in the open, asked how trying to warn anyone approaching to not test their patience. They looked at Sunny without even trying to hide their disdain. What do you want, rat? Sunny hesitated, then held out the soul shards. One of the guards glanced at them and grinned. Well, would you look at that? The rat has brought us a present. Chuckling, he took the glimmering crystals and waved a hand. Come on in, someone will meet you inside. Struggling to not glare at the armed sleepers with murder in his eyes, Sunny forced out a pale smile and cautiously walked past them. Then, looking up with dozens of human skulls swinging above them on rusty chains, he sighed darkly and led Cassie through the gates of the castle. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 134 to 134, Bright Castle. 1021 words. As he passed through the ornate gates, a large hall opened before them. Hearing Astrange wrestle from above, Sunny raised his head and saw tall windows with stained glass panes soaring to the distant ceiling. During the day, the hall must have been filled with cascading rays of beautiful light. Currently, though, several young women were nimbly moving from one window to another, draping them with thick sheets of crude fabric. The makeshift wooden ladders they used creaked and cracked, creating Astrange an almost melodic sound. It seemed asked how the sheets of fabric were being fastened in a way that prevented even the smallest glint of light from escaping the castle during the night. Sunny suspected that every window in the marble fortress was currently being covered in the same way. Just as his thought appeared in his mind, a loud noise thundered behind their backs. Turning around, he saw the ornate gates closing. The two guards who had met them outside were already sliding a heavy iron bolt into the sockets, their faces red from strain. The massive bar must have weighed more than the two of them combined. The castle was now sealed from the outside world, ready to face the onslaught of cursed darkness. Suddenly, Sunny felt like an animal caught in a cage. Trying to calm himself down, he looked around and noticed an opulent wooden desk that looked completely out of place in the grand hall. It must have been dragged here from some other part of the marble citadel. Behind the desk, a gaunt young man with nervous eyes was writing something down on a piece of parchment. The whole thing looked strangely similar to a reception desk in a luxurious hotel, or, rather, to what Sunny imagined such a thing would look like. He had never actually been to a hotel, of course. Hesitating for a few moments, he walked over to the desk and addressed the young man. Hey, we've been told that someone will meet us inside. The castle receptionist flinched and looked up from his paper, a fearful expression appearing on his face. When he realized who was speaking to him, though, the fear disappeared, replaced by a tentative smile. The young man had a thin face and a pale, unhealthy complexion. He looked hungry and weak, much more like those poor souls in the outer settlement than someone who lived in the castle. His clothes, however, were clean and tidy, without any signs of wear and tear like that of the people outside. Ah, guests, sorry, you gave me fright there. Welcome to the Bright Castle. Whoa, you were just in time. A couple of minutes later, and the gates would have been closed. Saying that, he threw a tense glance at the two guards and then quickly looked away. Anyway, my name is Harper. I'm responsible for guest accommodations today. Let's you. Oh, I didn't seem to recognize you guys. Is this your first time paying the tribute? Sunny stared at them for a couple of seconds, feeling Cassie squeeze his shoulder a little tighter, then said. Yes, Harper smiled. Congratulations. You might not even suspect it, but I was once in your shoes myself. In fact, it was just a few months ago. But ever since Lord Gunlaw graced me with his kindness, I've been living in the safety of the castle. You will have either too, I'm sure. Single quote. Right, Sunny didn't know if the young man was sincere in his gratitude to the local tyrant or was simply saying these things for the guards to hear, and honestly, he didn't care. What piqued his interest, though, was that Harper did not seem as surprised by the timing of their arrival into the dark city as if he had been. But then he realized that people living in the castle might not have known who came to the outer settlement and when. They would probably assume that Han Cassie had entered the dream realm close to the ruins and then spent the last 2 months scrounging for soul shards to pay their way into the castle. This was a good detailed talk now, since Sunny didn't want to announce the true extent of their competence just yet. Judging by how impressed Effie was by the fact that they had managed to carve their way through the labyrinth, this would attract a lot of unnecessary attention. Hesmelled with the corner of his mouth. So, what do need to do now? Harper picked Euphis quill and opened a large ledger. That's very simple, really. I'll just need your names to mark when the two of you pay the tribute, and that's pretty much it. We have a lot of spare rooms here, especially in the Tower of Dusk. It is very quiet, so how about I settle you there? There was a nervous glint in his eyes. Tower of Dusk probably means that it isn't the western part of the castle, facing the Crimson Spire. No wonder people didn't want to live there. But to Sunny, fewer people meant less danger. Heck of the gaunt young man added. Sure, no problem. Harper smiled. Great, that is great. So your names? Sunny interrupted him, trying to avoid dangerous questions. I'm Sunless, and this is Cassia. The young man wrote their names down and marked the date of their arrival. Sunny stared at this neat handwriting, his eyes locked on the short strings of numbers. So, it had actually been exactly 77 days since the night they had arrived on the forgotten shore. The three of them had scrupulously kept track of time for a while, but after their harrowing experience with the Soul Devourer, Sunny had lost the grasp on the actual count. Out there in the real world, the spring was already starting. A whole season had passed. It felt like a lifetime. Not paying any attention to the storm raging inside Sunny's heart, Harper closed the ledger and offered them a polite smile. All done. Now, leave your worries behind and follow me. Between these walls, you are completely safe. Nothing is going to hurt you. His tone was jovial, but Sunny didn't miss the quick glance Harper threw at the menacing guards standing silently by the sealed gate. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 135 to 135, Cohabitation. 1011 words. Harper led them through the castle, explaining small details about the rules and customs one had to follow once inside. He was a talkative and friendly guy, so Sunny quickly got the gist of it. In general, it was very simple. They were free to do whatever they wanted unless it broke the basic rules of cohabitation, with a few small caveats. There were areas in the marble fortress open to everyone, and areas that only members of Gunlogshas could enter. Those were marked by the symbol of a serpent coiled around a tall tower. As he walked, Sunny noticed several crude tapestries with that symbol woven on them. The cloth of the tapestries was black, with a stylized white tower and a golden serpent embroidered in their center. Heg guessed that this represented the Dark City, the Bright Castle, and its lord respectively. Apart from that, there wasn't much talk now except for when and where to find food, water, and other necessities. The last thing Harper said was about how they should behave around other inhabitants of the fortress. People here are very nice, but you still must remember to have manners. Especially when you are interacting with the guards and the hunters. These guys protect you and risk their lives to provide for us, so they deserve our respect. iPhone of them. If there's a misunderstanding, them and full of their burdens. Yes, Sunny threw a dark glance at the gaunt young man and translated that statement to, didn't mess with Gunlogus people, and if they are messing with you, just swallow it. How wonderful. Meanwhile, he was able to catch a few glimpses of how people actually lived inside the castle. To Sunny's surprise, they didn't seem nearly as put down and miserable as she had expected. In fact, everyone seemed to be more or less fine, going about their business with mundane casualness. Of course, there were signs of worry, stress and pressure on their faces, but the same could be said about people in the real world. All in all, the inhabitants of the castle looked surprisingly ordinary. I guess humans can adapt to anything. And as Changing Star had taught him, adaptability was the greatest strength. As long as there was some semblance of stability, humans would find a way. And it seemed as how the tyrannical master of the ancient fortress, hateful Ashawas, was providing the sleepers trapped on the forgotten shore with that stability. Effie's swords about how the bastard was the only thing holding this place together echoed in Sunny's mind. Perhaps Hesha, necessary evil. Finally, they reached the westernmost tower of the castle. Indeed, it was mostly empty and quiet. Few people seemed to stay here, driven away by the unnerving vision of the crimson spire looming in the distance. However, for the two of them, it was perfect. Cassie couldn't see at all, while Sunny was long accustomed to the presence of the spire because of his sensitivity to shadows. Plus, right now, all the windows in the tower were closed, hiding it from sight. Harper suddenly stopped and said in a somewhat embarrassed tone. I forgot to ask, would you guys been eating one room or two? Without thinking too much, Sunny and Cassie answered at the same time. 1, 2, then, they froze and turned to each other with petrified expressions. Cassie blushed, while Sunny became even paler. He didn't mean anything untoward by requesting a single room for the two of them. It's just that over the months spent camping together, being close to Cassie in case she needed help with something had become his habit. More importantly, he was unwilling to let her leave his sight even for a second in this unpredictable castle. He didn't trust anyone here, but in these new circumstances, requesting a single room suggested a different meaning. But there wasn't. Clearing his throat, Sunny looked at Harper and said, 2 rooms if they're next to each other. If that is not possible, then 1. The skittish young man scratched the back of his head, and then answered in a somewhat surprised tone. All right, I think I can find 2 adjacent rooms for you. Follow me. With that, he began walking forward. Sunny glanced at Cassie, then shook his head and followed behind Harper. She wouldn't misunderstand. Right. Soon, they were standing in front of 2 sturdy wooden doors. Harper handed Sunny 2 iron keys and smiled. Here where, the rooms are not very big, but they're really, cozy. Enjoy your first night of safety, guys. You must have not felt safe in a long time. I know I never did before entering the castle. Thank heavens that time ice behind me. Anyway, food will be served 1 hour after sunrise tomorrow, in the main hall of the keep. See you there. With that, he glanced at them one last time, smiled sheepishly, and walked away. Sunny and Cassie were left alone in awkward silence. Still feeling a little embarrassed, Sunny sighed and said, I hope you didn't think that I was. Cassie suddenly giggled. I know, I just didn't expect it. Let me guess, you distrust every single person in this castle, and therefore are going to watch me like a hawk to scare them all away. Like an overprotective, mean, violent big brother. Right. With a smile, she turned her head this way and another, and then added. To be honest, I didn't feel safe here either. So, thank you. Although I must say, this place seems almost like a hotel. My parents took me on a mountain vacation once, and we stayed at a really old hotel. What was it called? Overgaze. Overlook. Anyway, this place is exactly like that. Sunny grinned. Right, I've never been to a hotel, but that was my first thought as well. Of course, that was if the hotel in question was populated by hundreds of nightmare spell carriers, with a murderous tyrant for an owner, and not a single police officer around to call for help if something happened. Funny. Sunny had spent most of his life scared of the policemen and trying to avoid them at all costs. But now, he actually missed them a lot. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 136 to 136, Reflection. 1054 words. On the other side of the sturdy door, there was a tiny room with stone walls and a single, narrow window that was closed with wooden shutters and draped in thick cloth. Harper had warned them not to open the windows during the night, but out here in the Tower of Dusk, no one would want to stare at the view anyway. Allowing any amount of light to seep out of the castle at night was considered Toby's for crime, so he had been pretty emphatic on that point. Of course, the gaunt young man didn't know that neither Sunny nor Cassie required light to move in the dark. They could open the windows as wide as he wanted, not that they had any reason to. Inside the room, there was a bed with a straw mattress, a flimsy chest, and a tiny desk. On the desk, there was a basin filled with water, a few strips of clean cloth and an oil lamp. There was even a small round mirror made of polished bronze. Sunny caught a glimpse of his reflection and flinched, asked how seeing Astranger. In this past 2 months, he had seen himself through the eyes of the shadow plenty of times, but it wasn't the same. He had changed a lot. His face was much sharper and angular now, the last remnants of youthful roundness chased away from it by the harsh gauntlet of the labyrinth, although Sunny never had a lot of that, to begin with. It was thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes and other signs of extreme exhaustion. His black hair was longer, falling over his eyes in a dirty mess. What changed the most, however, were the eyes themselves. Deep in their dark depths, there was a glint of calm, heavy, bleak coldness that had not been there before. With a startling realization, Sunny understood that he, too, now possessed the look of a seasoned fighter. The type of calculating coldness hiding in the eyes of such men was known as murder math in the outskirts. Hero and Neffy's had that quality, too. Only in their case, it made them seem like true warriors. Sunny, on the other hand, Sunny had the eyes of a killer. And even deeper than that, visible only to him, golden threads of Weaver's inhuman legacy glowed mysteriously in the darkness. Staring at this reflection, Sunny grinned darkly and said in a strange, hoarse voice. Quote. Looking good, sunless, leaving his shadow to guard the door to Cassie's room, Sunny fell on the soft mattress, wrapped himself in a blanket, and tried to get himself to sleep. Here in the safety of the mighty castle, surrounded by hundreds of people, lying on a real bed, it was hard to believe that just a few days ago he was traveling through the cursed darkness of the deadly sea on a rickety boat, fighting terrifying monsters in the bizarre landscape of the coral labyrinth, and losing his mind piece by piece to the gluttonous hunger of fantasy and soul-devouring tree. It all seemed like a fever's dream. This isn't bad. With that thought, he fell asleep. In the morning, washed and refreshed, he waited for Cassie in the hallway. Even the puppeteer's shroud, which finally got a chance to return to the Soul Sea for a decently long period of time and restore itself, looked clean and tidy once again. That poor armor had gone through enough abuse to kill addos and sleepers, yet it still held fast, saving his life on numerous occasions. Sunny was reminded of how lucky he had been to receive it. The blind girl did not make him wait for long. Soon, she came out of her room, practically glowing with loveliness and freshness. It seemed asked how Cassie had done the same things as Sunny. After months spent crawling through blood and dirt in the wilderness, they finally looked and felt like humans again. Good morning, Sunny blinked. He had almost forgotten how stunning Cassie was. With her delicate features, bright blue eyes and pale blonde hair, she looked like a beautiful porcelain doll. The blind girl had dismissed the enchanted cloak, leaving her dressed only in a light tunic, with leather sandals on her feet. She was nothing short of breathtaking. He closed his eyes and sighed. This smells like trouble. Good morning, Cassie. She turned her head to him and wrinkled her nose. Sunny frowned. What? The blind girl knitted her brow. I don't know. You smell different. He stared at her for a few moments, and then laughed. If this is your way of saying that I used Torique, then thank you, I guess. Giggling, Cassie came closer and put her hand on his shoulder. That's not what I meant. Anyway, let's go eat. The two of them were in a strangely good mood. Sunny guided Cassie to the main keep of the castle, following the route that Harper had explained to them the previous evening. One the way, he was careful to avoid any doors and corridors marked with the symbol of the golden serpent coiled around a white tower. His shadow was going to take a look at the forbidden areas of the fortress later, most likely. But for now, they had to keep a LOW profile and avoid trouble. Finding the keep was not hard, as many other sleepers were going there to partake in the breakfast too. Meals were served twice a day in the castle, once in the morning and once right before sunset. If you missed one and had no other way to procure food, you would have to remain hungry for the rest of the day. Sunny observed the sleepers with curiosity, sometimes describing them to Cassie in a low voice. The inhabitants of the castle were very different from the desperate dwellers of the outer settlement. They generally seemed healthy, or at least well-fed. The amount of farmer-type memories here was also much higher, although many still wore clothes made of mundane fabrics. Almost all of them were young and beautiful, with only a couple of the people he had seen looking like they were past their early 20s. Despite that, few could compare to Cassie in terms of looks. Finally, they entered the main hall of the keep, where long wooden tables were placed to accommodate the morning crowd of hungry sleepers. Suddenly, hundreds of eyes turned to stare at Cassie and Sunny. Feeling cold shivers running down his spine, he yelped. Crap, share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 137 to 137, All Eyes on Me. 1,341 words. The main hall of the mighty castle was grandiose and majestic in appearance. The gentle light of the morning sun was cascading through the tall windows and reflecting from the white marble walls, filling it with a bright radiance. The walls were decorated with intricate carvings that spanned dozens of meters, creating a regal tapestry. At the far end of the hall, a set of stairs led to a dark alcove. The back wall of the alcove had numerous small holes cut through it, and with sunlight shining through them into the deep darkness, it seemed as how a fragment of the starlit night sky was somehow locked within the castle. Beneath that light stood an empty white throne. Sunny stared at the throne for a few moments, then lowered his gaze and glanced at the several hundred people that were looking at them. Long wooden tables were placed along the length of the grand hall, with a motley crowd of sleepers sitting on crude benches behind them, busy consuming their food. There was some sort of hierarchy in how they were grouped, but Sunny couldn't understand it yet. Currently, most of them were staring in his direction. Sunny gulped. It took him a couple of seconds to realize that all these people were not, in fact, looking at them. They were all looking at Cassie, clearly startled by her loveliness. Crap, just Ashahad thought, this smelled like trouble. The blind girl, meanwhile, was oblivious to the commotion her appearance had caused. Sensing the sudden tension in his muscles, she asked, Sunny, why did you stop? He narrowed his eyes, gave the crowd of sleepers his most menacing scowl, and answered in a flat tone. Just taking in the view. Then, Sunny walked over to the young women rationing the food, received 2 plates of steaming monster meat stew, and guided Cassie to a relatively empty spot at the endophone of the tables. He even got 2 cups of something that closely resembled tea. Sitting down, he put the crudely made utensils into Cassie's hand and stared at this plate. He didn't like all this attention one bit. Look at that, sauce. They even got vegetables. I swear there's at least 2 pieces of tomato in my stew. Or is it a carrot? What is that thing that looks like a red potato? Sunny had only seen vegetables in the academic cafeteria, so he was not well versed in differentiating them. Teacher Julius had also only mentioned them in passing, since the chances of encountering a vegetable from the real world in the dream realm were not very high. To be precise, he had briefly showed Sunny pictures of the most common earth vegetables and said that eye fever was to find something that makes him think, that thing looks familiar. He should turn around and run. Cassie smelled her stew and said with a smile, I think it's a beetroot. Sunny blinked. Quote. Never heard of it. While they were innocently chatting, he was observing the sleepers through his shadow, waiting tensely for things to go wrong. And pretty soon, they did. Sunny gritted his teeth when 2 rough-looking young men suddenly rose from their benches and headed across the hall toward them with unpleasant excitement burning in their eyes. Here we go. Who would have thought that the thing that landed him in trouble would be Cassie's beauty, of all things? Usually, it was either his sharp tongue or his general obnoxiousness. Never, not even once, had it been his looks. Ouch, it shouldn't be jealous, right? The worst part was that the 2 approaching sleepers were obviously a part of Gunlaga's gang. It was apparent from their armor and the fact that they carried their weapons in actual sheaths, like a pair of idiots. Memories could be freely summoned out of thin air, so the only reason to keep them visible at all times was for the sake of intimidation. He had noted that detail after meeting the castle guards yesterday. What had Harper said? If there is a misunderstanding with one of Gunlaga's people, remember that these guys carry a heavy burden. Treat them with respect. In other words, swallow it. The young men approached their corner of the table with vulgar smiles. They were clearly undressing Cassie with their eyes. Sunny turned his head and looked up at them. The sleepers sitting nearby turned away with heavy looks, clearly afraid and uncomfortable. Maybe they just want to say hi. Sunny opened his mouth. Respectful, remember, be respectful. And said, what the fuck are you degenerates staring at? The whole hall was suddenly enveloped in insolence. Once again, Sunny had found himself in the center of attention. But this time, everyone was actually staring at them instead of Cassie. I guess that's better. The few nearby sleepers who had pretended to not notice anything a few seconds earlier lowered their heads, asked how trying to become smaller and disappear completely. Sunny glanced at them with disdain and turned back to the pair of young men who were currently towering above him, a dark and dangerous light dancing in their eyes. To be honest, his incendiary reaction had caught Sunny by surprise. The anger had taken the better of him for a moment, forcing the words out of his mouth. But the damage had already been done. It seemed as how his brotherly instincts were not only still alive, but also somewhat overwhelming. To hell with this. They want to see dark and dangerous. I'll show them. He glared at the 2 idiots, knowing that, at this point, there was no way back. Beside him, Cassie turned her head, an alarmed expression on her face. One of the idiots grinned. We were just hoping to politely introduce ourselves to this lovely little doll, but hey, we can get acquainted with the ugly little clown first. How about it? He glanced at the other sleeper, who was looking at Sunny with no humor in his eyes whatsoever. Cassie frowned, then said, why are you? However, at that moment, the second young man took a step forward and growled, interrupting her. What did you just say, clown? Do you know who where? Fool, where Gunlagasman? His hand was resting on the pommel of his sword. Sunny knew that escalating the situation was not a wise thing Toto, but at this point, he didn't have a choice. Backing down now would only lead to disaster. Heck knew this type of people well. The moment they felt a weakness, it was all over. They understood only 2 things, fear and strength. Outstretching one hand, he scowled, looked the young men right into the eyes, and said, congratulations, now get lost before I make you dead men. Perhaps recognizing something in his voice, or maybe in his eyes, the sleeper who had his hand on the pommel of the sword hesitated. For a second, Sunny almost believed that his threat worked. But then the young man furtively glanced around, and this tiny hope evaporated. If they were alone, maybe the sleeper would have reconsidered his desire to antagonize Sunny any further. But with all these people watching, he couldn't show fear. Sunny failed to account for one crucial detail. All bullies were cowards, but what they feared the most was people finding out about their cowardice. Gunlagasman bared his teeth in a threatening grin. Those are terribly big words, coming from a puny weakling like you. You know what, I think your girl needs to keep better company. Why didn't we help her out by making you disappear? Sunny smiled. Single quote. I guess I'm going to kill a couple of fools today. Cassie, meanwhile, was not happy with what was happening at all. The frown on her face deepened. I'll decide what company to keep myself. Now, please. However, they weren't listening to her. Sunny was already bracing himself for the worst-case scenario, prepared to summon the midnight shard at a moment's notice. But then, suddenly, a calm voice sounded from behind his back. Leave them alone, please. They are my friends. Caught by surprise, Sunny hurriedly shifted his perspective to the shadow and glanced back. Behind him, a tall and confident young man stood calmly with his hands resting at his hips. He had brown hair and a gentle, handsome face. His eyes sparkled with friendly humor. It was, Caster, share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 138 to 138, Unexpected Reunion. 1006 words. Without a doubt, it was Caster, the only person Sunny had ever seen defeat Nephi's in a fight, even IFITWAS just during training. Back at the academy, Caster had been a star of their batch of sleepers. Handsome and friendly, he was not only popular, but also respected. And although it pained Sunny to admit it, that wasn't only because of his lofty status of a legacy. Even other legacies looked up to him. Many even considered him Toba the true king of the rankings, speculating that Changing Star had gotten her first place by mistake. Castor was powerful, skilled, and charming. He was also humble and had an amiable personality that made it hard for anyone not to like him. His background was impeccable, and his future was unquestionably bright. Basically, he was the polar opposite of Sunny. Damn, I knew that voice sounded familiar. Sunny turned his head and stared at the handsome young man in utter bewilderment. What was that guy doing here? The two sleepers who didn't even know how close they had come to tasting the sharp edge of the midnight shard were doing the same. There was no more excitement on their faces. Oh, it's you. That was my line. Castor looked at them with a silent smile. There was no apparent hostility in his eyes, but for some reason, Gunlogismen seemed to their desire to steer trouble. After glancing at each other, one of them said in a hesitant tone, "You know this guy, Castor?" Heck of the manid. Yeah, we were in the academy together. Didn't mind his rude behavior. Guys, that's just how highs. Rough around the edges, but really nice once you get talk know him well. Since when do we know each other? Sunny was irrationally angry at that statement, but forced himself to keep his mouth shut. He understood that Castor was just trying to defuse the situation. Actually, his arrival had been very timely. Sunny was sure of his ability to dispatch a couple of thugs, but what would happen next? He doubted that other members of Gunlogshost would just sit and watch. Becoming involved in a conflict with the masters of the castle on his first day here would have been less than ideal. The thugs in question, meanwhile, had given up. Trying to keep the appearance of being in control, they glared at Castor darkly and backed down. Teach your friend some manners, Castor. Next time we want less lenient. With that, they turned around and retreated back to their seats, throwing menacing looks at anyone who dared to stare at them. Soon, the grand hall was once again filled with the hum of voices. Castor followed them with his eyes and then turned to Sunny, his smile becoming a little somber. That wasn't a very smart thing Toto, my friend. Sunny scoffed. Yeah, well, who says that I'm smart? Wait, no, that didn't come out right. The tall young man stared at them for a few seconds and then sighed. In any case, it's very nice to see you. Both of you. With that, he sat down, asked how somebody had invited him. Well, admittedly, there was some connection between them. Wishing to talk to people with whom you had attended academy was sort of understandable. Still, Sunny didn't like it. Throwing a quick glance at Cassie, he smiled coldly and said, "What, are you very shocked to see us alive?" Castor hesitated. It's good that you managed to survive. It seemed that this was his way of admitting that yes, he was surprised, but in a pleasant way. It wasn't a secret that Sunny and Cassie had been seen as two walking corpses by all the other sleepers in the academy. Just like Neffys and Castor occupied the top two positions in the rankings, they were dead last. Because of that, the two of them had been shunned and ostracized. Of course, when it came to Sunny, he had only welcomed the cold treatment of his peers, but had actually been the one to engineer it. In any case, no one had wanted to be around them, asked how afraid of becoming infected by the invisible aura of death that followed them wherever they went. Sunny himself had been guilty of avoiding Cassie as much as could in the past. It must have been very strange to see the two of them alive and well after months spent among the horrors of the Forgotten Shore. Cassie smiled. Thank you. Castor reciprocated her smile and asked, his tone strangely warm. You are Cassia, right? And you are, Sunless. Sunny gave him a curt nod. Right, although I'm surprised that you remember our names. Didn't think that we've forgotten how you guys used to treat us. Cassie squeezed his hand and said in a disapproving tone. Sunny. Castor chuckled. No, Hesh right, we behaved like a bunch of jerks. Looking back, there were a lot of things we did wrong. If only we had known better. His voice trailed off, and after being silent for some time, the handsome young man suddenly smiled with nostalgia. But still, those days in the academy were not all bad, right? Hey, I still remember the first time I met you, Sunless. You made quite an impression. All those tall tales, spitting in the faces of awakened tyrants, slaying sword saints with a shake of a finger. He chuckled, remembering the good old days. Sunny grinned. He was in the mood for some mischief. What, that trivial stuff? Ha, chill this games. You should have seen the things I've done in the labyrinth. Now that's nothing to brag about. Castor looked at them with humorous sparks dancing in his eyes. Oh, well, don't tell. What else have you done? Sunny shrugged with profuse indifference. This and that, let's see. He pretended to think for a few moments, and then said in a bored tone. I guess the most incredible thing I've done was killing a great devil with just one strike of my sword. Finished him right off, no problem at all. I even got a memory from that kill. But before you ask, no, I can show it to you. Because, oh, right. I ate it. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 139 to 139. The incredible adventures and astonishing deeds of heroic dreamer Sunless and his beautiful female companions Princess Neffys and Lady Cassia, abridged Volume 1. 1022 words. Castor stared at them for a long time, then suddenly laughed. Even Cassie giggled, entertained by Sunny Sharness' delivery. Shaking his head, the handsome young man smiled and said, I see your sense of humor did not change. Good, that is good. Few people manage to preserve I there. Sunny blinked a couple of times and said, pretending to be offended. What do you mean, sense of humor? It's the honest truth. He received another bout of flatter instead of an answer. Single quote. There was food, safety, and laughter, he thought suddenly, remembering how Cassie had described the bright castle after dreaming of it for the first time. She had also seen Sunny leading her through its gates. Her prophetic visions were turning out to be frighteningly accurate. Makes you wonder about that other vision she saw. Not allowing himself to become distracted, Sunny chased away the ominous feeling and hid a smile. Then, with a shrug, he scoffed. Well, didn't believe me if you didn't want to. That was just one of my many adventures, anyway. Although the other ones were, admittedly, less remarkable, you know, the usual stuff. Slaying dozens of awakened creatures, being resurrected from the doors of death by a beautiful princess, summoning ancient horrors from the depths of the cursed sea, outsmarting ancient fiends to escape from their clutches, sailing through the abyss on a boat made of demon bones, fighting gargantuan leviathans underwater, and so forth. Mundane crap like that. Asha was talking. Cassie gradually stopped laughing and turned to him with a somewhat startled expression on her face. It seemed asked how it was only now, with the harrowing journey already behind them, that she had finally realized how outlandish Edel actually was. Put together, the facts of their bloody struggle to survive sounded like something out of a fairy tale. But they both knew that all of that had actually happened. If that happened to them, Castor chuckled. Wow, compared to you, Sunny, my own story sounds kinda lame. I just entered the dream realm near the city wall and spent a few days running away from a bunch of terrifying monsters, then stumbled on a hunting party from the castle, and that's pretty much it. He sighed. By the way, when did you guys arrive? I'm sure I haven't seen you around before. There was no reason Tolly, and Sunny couldn't anyway. Looking longingly at this monster stew, which was slowly growing cold, he sighed and said. We reached the Dark City 2 days ago, and entered the castle yesterday at dusk. The handsome Legacy stared at them, then blinked a couple of times. Wait, what do you mean? Did you guys really spend 2 months in the labyrinth? Uh-oh, finally, the moment he had been wary of came. Sunny really didn't want for anyone to think that he was some kind of a powerful figure. First of all, there was no better advantage than being underestimated by the enemy. Secondly, he still had to hide the fact that Changing Star had not been the only one to receive a true name in the first nightmare. Luckily, he had long thought of an exceptionally convincing excuse. When in trouble, blame everything on Neffy's. Laughing inwardly, Sunny pretended to shiver inside. Yeah, I didn't even want to think about it. That place, it's for hell. Honestly, if it wasn't for Changing Star, both Ofus would have been long dead. She wouldn't have survived without his help, too, but Castor didn't need talk now that. Sunny was pretty sure that mentioning Neff's name anywhere near the names of 2 losers like Cassie and him were believed Toby would make anyone think that she had single-handedly carried the both of them to safety on her back. As it turns out, he was right. As soon as Ash mentioned Neffy's, something changed on Castor's face. With a strange look in his eyes, the handsome man leaned forward a little and asked in a deceptively calm tone. Changing, Lady Neffy's ISA live. She is here. He had already forgotten all about how unlikely it was for someone like Sunny to survive a long journey through the deadly nightmare of the labyrinth. Sunny narrowed his eyes slightly. Castor's reaction was a little bit more intense than he had anticipated. It was on the border of being weird. But then again, the tall and handsome Legacy had seemed to be strangely enamored with Neffy's even back at the academy. You bastard. Enraged for some unknown reason, Sunny gritted his teeth and said. Yeah, shush around. Turning her head slightly in his direction, Cassie hesitated for a moment and then added. We only had 2 soul shards when we came to the castle. So she's staying in the outer settlement. For now. Castor leaned back, a hint of disappointment appearing on his face for a fraction of a second. Then, he inhaled deeply and said. I see. Sunny took a sip of his tea and asked. Why are you so interested in Ofus? The handsome young man looked at them with surprise. What? Oh, I'm just glad talk now that more Ofus survived. Then, he sighed and shook his head. From what I was able to learn, there were no more than 7 sleepers sent to the Forgotten Shore by the spell this year. Up until today, it thought that I was the only one to survive. It is good talk now that I was wrong. Castor's face grew solemn. If Lady Neffy's was with you, that explains how you have managed to reach the Bright Castle alive. But the other 3, I'm afraid that they are long dead. May their souls rest in peace. Sunny and Cassie lowered their heads, coming to terms with this new information. It was true that they had not been treated well by the rest of the sleepers in the academy. Still, it was also somewhat heartbreaking talk now that several of the kids they had known, even IFITWAS just for a short amount of time, were now gone, killed by the vicious crucible of the dream realm. The cruel and ruthless nightmare spell had taken its first victims. Who would be next? Without having to look at each other, they quietly repeated Castor's words. Quote. May their souls rest in peace. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 140 to 140, True Legacy. 995 words. Some time passed in silence, with each of them thinking about what their own fates would be in this cursed place. Finally, Sunny extricated himself from this dark reverie and asked, So you've been here all this time? How are you able to afford to live in the castle? Didn't tell Met that you have joined this Golden Serpent's army. Castor sighed. No, it didn't. Although I'm going totally if say that I haven't been tempted to. One way or the other, all roads here lead to Gunlog and his men. I didn't think there's more than a handful of powerful sleepers who have managed to remain independent. Currently, I'm one of them. Sunny stared at them and repeated his question. How so? The handsome young man shrugged. My aspect ability gives me certain advantage when it comes to escaping the clutches of the nightmare creatures. Not so much with killing them, though. I went on a few hunting expeditions with other independent hunters, but that was a mistake. Webb barely escaped alive. Still, it landed me a few soul shards. The rest I got from selling a couple of memories. Right, unlike them normal people, the proud Legacy had entered the dream realm with an entire arsenal of memories that his clan had prepared for him. He had also started with a somewhat considerable amount of soul essence already absorbed, although it wouldn't have been too much. Unlike memories, which could be brought back to the real world by anyone, actual soul shards were physical objects, and ASIC, only masters and saints were able to transport them, because they traveled between realms physically and not just in spirit like sleepers and awakened. That meant that even rich Legacy clans couldn't afford to have too much soul essence to their signs in advance. Masters were a rare breed, after all, let alone saints. In any case, Castor had it better than anyone else on the Forgotten Shore. His ancestral memories were enough to buy him months, perhaps even years of a tranquil life in the castle. Heckle used this time to learn the ins and outs of the Dark City to become an independent hunter or consider his position and join Gunlog Shasta eventually. Even in this hell, his background gave him an enormous advantage. Lucky bastard, but that still didn't explain why those thugs were unwilling to get on his bad side. Sunny frowned. Why were Gunlogismen afraid of you? Castor looked at them with irony. Those two. Oh, right, you have just arrived at the castle. Well, basically, there are different kinds of people serving Gunlog. The guys you have so carelessly offended are members of the castle guard. They are at the bottom of the totem pole. They are also the weakest and have little to no real battle experience. What minor reputation I have I not to make them think twice before messing with me. For a second, there was a dangerous gleam in his eyes. Because of Castor's amiable personality, when talking to him, it was easy to forget what the word legacy really meant. Legacies were trained to fight and kill since they could barely walk. Every one of them was a true powerhouse. Sunny had no doubt that Castor's actual reputation in the castle was not as negligible as would have them believe. After all, he was the only human, no, actually, the only being Sunny knew of that had managed to defeat Neffy's in combat. And in terms of personal power, Neffy's was as high as Sone could get in Sunny's heart. No one else could even compare. He was also sure that Castor's reputation was earned by spilling blood. I really hope that I won't have to face this guy in battle one day, Sunny thought, feeling a cold sensation that had desperately hoped was not a premonition. With ASIGH, had tried to hide this unease and asked. So I shouldn't be worried about their retaliation, the amiable young man gave him an. The two guards you have humiliated might try to do something want their own, but there won't be any reaction from the host itself. But I doubt that they will. Just didn't antagonize them any further. He suddenly grew serious. However, if they were hunters or, even worse, one of the pathfinders, even my name would not have protected you. You'd simply be dead. So, please, watch your actions in the future. This castle, Anazance, it can be as dangerous as city outside. Especially for someone with your, temperament. What is that supposed to mean? Sunny wanted to bite back, but then closed his mouth. Yeah, he really did have a temperament that attracted trouble. Guilty as charged. While he was reconsidering his life choices, Cassie suddenly spoke in a quiet voice. Castor, I see really no way out of here. The proud legacy looked at her and remained silent for a long time, a somber expression finding its way to his face. His eyes were heavy and bleak. After a while, he sighed and said, none that any Ofus can ever hope to reach, Cassia. Aside us right now, this is where we have to live. Maybe something will change in the future. But for now, just take care of yourself and try to survive. Standing up, He glanced at them one last time and smiled. It was so nice to see you, guys. Really, I'll leave you to your food now, if that's okay. If you need anything in the future, don't hesitate to come find me. My quarters are in the Tower of Dawn. Quarters, of course that miscreant has, quarters. With that, Castor left, letting Sunny finally get to his stew, which was barely warm by that point. Great, breakfast is ruined, he thought angrily, drilling 2 holes in the tall sleeper's back. His fault, it's all his fault, not mine. Yeah, definitely. Sometime later, Sunny was lying on his bed with his eyes closed. The Tower of Dusk was calm and quiet. It was time to send his shadow on a walk. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 141 to 141, Golden Serpent. 1043 words. Over the next 5 days, Sunny mostly stayed in his room while his shadow stealthily prowled around the castle, spying on people and learning their secrets. Slowly, He began to understand the undercurrents that flowed beneath the seemingly peaceful surface of life in this pristine white fortress. Of course, in reality, things weren't peaceful at all, and as far from pure as Sone could imagine. But that was to be expected from a place where hundreds of lost youths lived with no hope of ever finding their way back home, away from all the restraints of civilization. He wasn't surprised at all. If anything, it was strange to see some semblance of law and order, no matter how detestable and revolting, persevere despite all the obstacles that stood in the way. Somehow, the inhabitants of the castle were able to coexist with each other in a fragile balance. The system was cleverly built in a way that allowed the abused to dream of a better life and restrained the abusers from going too far. Better life meant winning Gunlaga's favor, while going too far meant losing it and being banished into the cold darkness of the outer settlement. Both fear and hope were created and firmly grasped by the Bright Lord. Their mere existence kept people in their places. Sunny suspected that the same dynamic, just substituted for a different kind of reality, reigned in the slum outside of the castle walls. The outer settlement seemed to exist separate from the castle, but in fact, both were simply parts of own large ecosystem. People on the outside longed to be allowed inside, while people on the inside dreaded being exiled to the outside. Because the possibility of a better life, or a worse one, existed, they were distracted from the fact that, no matter what happened, they would still be spinning in a circle. Like a serpent biting its own tail, the bright castle in the outer settlement created a closed cycle of exploitation and abuse that, paradoxically, kept everyone in the dark city sane and alive. It was nothing short of ingenious. Of course, Sunny wanted no part of it. He didn't know how many people were currently surviving in the slum, but there were somewhere around 500 sleepers living in the ancient stronghold. However, not all of them shared the same status. There was a complex hierarchy in place, separating people into different castes. Some of these groups had a distinct place in the hierarchy, while others were less clearly defined. Most of the inhabitants of the castle, unsurprisingly, were directly serving Gunlog. They were guards, hunters, pathfinders, artisans, and handmaidens. Ruling over them were 5 lieutenants who answered directly to the Lord himself, each responsible for their own aspect of the day-to-day life of the fortress. The castle guard was the largest of these groups, consisting of around 150 men. They were in charge of guarding the stronghold and enforcing Gunlaga's laws. Just like Castor had said, they were near the bottom of the totem pole in terms of power and status. Anyone with a remotely useful aspect ability could join the guard, and although their training was rather rigorous, actual opportunities to experience combat were few and far between. That was not to say that their job was not dangerous. Every time a stray nightmare creature climbed the hill or attacked from above, it was their duty to either kill or chase the monster away. And out here in the Dark City, no monster was anything less than terrifying and absolutely deadly. The castle guard was led by a morose giant Ophaman named Tessai, who was one of Gunlaga's most trusted lieutenants and perhaps the oldest sleeper on the Forgotten Shore. He was just 2 years short of 30. Tessai was a ferocious fighter and ruthless commander, holding his subordinates in honor and grip. Above the castle guard, there were hunters. These were the elites of Gunlaga's forces, each possessing a powerful combat aspect, rich battle experience, and sharp wit to make use of both. There were around 50 of them, divided into 7 hunting parties. Each morning, as soon as gates of the castle opened, one of the parties left the safety of the impregnable marble walls and ventured into the harrowing maze of the Dark City to hunt and kill awakened creatures. It was thanks to their efforts that people in the ancient stronghold had food on their plates. Without them, none of this would have been possible. Hunters were recruited from the ranks of guards, and becoming a hunter was a dream come true. That was because these professionals enjoyed plentiful rewards from the Lord, such as living in a room of their own as opposed to cramped barracks, better food and access to various luxury items, best memories and tools the bright castle could provide, as well as many other things. Of course, the other side of the coin was that their lives were often the shortest. Despite all their experience and preparations, many never returned from the hunts. And the only reason any did at all was the Pathfinders. Pathfinders served as guides for the hunting parties. Just as Effie had said, the secret to surviving in the Dark City was to find and kill comparatively weaker creatures without stumbling into something far more deadly. They made sure Toto just that, track the awakened monsters without leading the pack of hunters into the jaws of fallen abominations. There were so few Pathfinders that Sunny even questioned whether they could be categorized as a group. In the whole castle, there were less than a dozen. Each of them was a seasoned veteran who earned his role through surviving long years of bloody battles in the ruins, and thus had a chance to live long enough to learn large areas of the Dark City like his own 5 fingers. Needless to say, all of them were incredibly fearsome combatants and enjoyed lavish, sometimes even decadent lifestyles. Both hunters and Pathfinders were led by a charismatic man called Gemma. Gemma came to the Forgotten Shore in the same year as Gunlog, and had helped him take control of the castle. Together, these 3 groups, guards, hunters, and Pathfinders, formed Gunlog's army, which was simply known as Host. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 142 to 142, Behind the Scenes. 984 words. There were 2 other groups of people that belonged to Gunlog. The first of them consisted of sleepers with useful utility abilities and their helpers. These people, known as artisans, played a very important role in the life of the castle. They were responsible for creating and maintaining various items that were either vital to survival or made existing on the Forgotten Shore less unbearable, such as clothes, tools, equipment, utensils, and various gear. Each artisan had a small team of less gifted sleepers helping them craft the necessary items. All in all, there were around 800 of them in total, with most of that number consisting of the assistants. They were led by a young woman called Keto, who was a talented manager and had an ability that allowed her to change attributes of certain plants. The vegetables in Sunny's stew came from her garden. Since such an ability was nothing short of priceless on the Forgotten Shore, where food was scarce and mostly homogeneous, it wasn't surprising that she had become one of the lieutenants despite being much younger than the rest of them. The status of artisans was somewhat of a tense subject in the Bright Castle. Because they were largely non-combatants, guards felt that their position should be inferior to that of people actually risking their lives in vicious battles against nightmare creatures. Artisans, on the contrary, believed that the rarity of utility aspects and the vital role they played in maintaining the living conditions inside the castle should land them more prestige than the castle guard, which basically recruited any random nobody, enjoyed. This conflict had been simmering for a long time, and was not going to be resolved anytime soon. Funnily enough, hunters, who risked their lives the most, did not care about the issue one way or another. Their leader Gemma, however, was silently supporting the artisans and their chief, Keto, which prevented the guards from being too forceful in their argument. The last group of people who belonged to Gunlog was the handmaidens. These were the young women Sunny had seen quietly performing various chores around the castle, like making sure that windows were properly closed before the onset of the night or preparing and handing out food during mealtime. They were responsible for maintaining the castle itself, as well as serving the high-ranking members of the host. There were also around 800 of them. From what Sunny knew about the world, these poor girls should have been the prime victims of abuse within the walls of the ancient stronghold, but to his surprise, they were actually strangely revered, and even a little feared. The main reason for this was their leader, a mysterious and strikingly beautiful woman known as Seishin. Seishin not only took care of her handmaidens, but also secretly taught them how to defend themselves. The exact extent of their training was unknown, but Sunny clearly saw that members of the castle guard were very careful to behave themselves around handmaidens most of the time. The other reason was that, like everything else in the castle, the young women technically belonged to Gunlog, and Gunlog was very particular about people laying hands on his belongings without permission. Even if some foolish guard was brave enough to enter Seishin, no one with a desire to live was willing to get on the bad side of the Bright Lord. Sunny, however, was already scared enough by Seishin herself. The first time he had sent his shadow to take a look at what the handmaidens were up to when no one was watching, it had almost gotten caught. That was the first time someone managed to sense his shadow. One moment, beautiful Seishin was calmly standing with her back to the shaded corner where it was concealed, giving instructions to her subordinates, and in the next, she suddenly turned around and looked directly at the hiding shadow. Not knowing what else to do, Sunny shut his eyes and shifted all of his perception back. He was fairly sure that no one would be able to directly see the shadow. After all, his innate stealth enhancement was even more pronounced when it came to his silent companion. However, there were a lot of different aspects. Many awakened, for example, were able to feel when someone was looking at them. Praying that this was the case here, Sunny waited for a while before cautiously opening one eye. Luckily, this time, he didn't cause too much of a commotion. Confirming that Seishin had returned to her conversation, he hurriedly sent the shadow away and made sure to stay away from the mysterious beauty, and her handmaidens in general, ever since. The last 100 people in the castle were those who paid tribute, but didn't serve Gunlog directly. There was no real name for this group, so Sunny simply called them tenants in his mind. There were 2 types of tenants. A smaller number of them were those who were able to make a decent living by providing Gunlogismen with various services, mostly having to do with craftsmanship and entertainment. For example, there was a man who created something akin to a music lounge, another one who operated a small theater troupe, and even an entrepreneurial girl who owned a gambling den. A larger number of tenants were people like Harper, those who had entered the castle through luck and remained there by the skin of their teeth, desperately trying to earn soul shards for tribute by acting as servants and doing various menial jobs. These poor folks were at the very bottom of the social hierarchy of the castle. And on the opposite side of that hierarchy, there was the Golden Serpent, the master of the castle, Bright Lord Gunlog himself. The man who, by Fee's description, was nearly immortal. On his 5th day in the ancient stronghold, Sunny had finally laid eyes on this loathsome tyrant. He didn't like what he saw at all. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads, redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 143 to 143, Gunlog. 1037 words. Despite the fact that Gunlog Shivi presence permeated every centimeter of the castle, the Bright Lord himself was strangely elusive. He didn't show himself often, preferring to rule through his 5 proxies. Whether it was out of arrogance, paranoia or some other reason, Sunny did not know. After the incident with Sishin, he was afraid to let his shadow walk too freely and tried to avoid going anywhere near the fearsome master of the ancient stronghold. Because of these precautions, he had not seen Gunlog until their 5th day in the castle. As it turned out, when Golden Serpent did show up, he liked to leave an impression. Sunny and Cassie were about to receive their usual breakfast when the whole grand hall suddenly grew deathly silent. Feeling that something was wrong, they turned to the entrance, just in time to see a torrent of guards pouring inside. Sunny's heart skipped a beat. What is this? Fearing for the worst, had tried to think of the best way to escape, but luckily, the menacing soldiers of the host paid them no attention. Instead, they quickly dispersed around the hall and moved the long tables to the walls, creating a large open space in the middle. Cassie grasped Sunny's shoulder and whispered, "What is going on?" He hesitated, then answered uncertainly, "I'm not sure." Suddenly, he caught sight of Castor standing among the crowd. The handsome young man had a solemn look on his face. His gaze was turned to the dark alcove at the far end of the hall. One beyond, all the sleepers turned to face the same direction. Sunny followed their example. Slowly, 5 figures stepped out of the darkness of the alcove and stood at the steps leading up to the throne. They were Gemma, Tessai, Sishin, Kido, and the last of the 5 lieutenants. When Sunny noticed him, an involuntary shudder ran through his body. The 5th lieutenant had no official duties in the Bright Castle, but everyone here feared him the most. It was Astrange, pale man with ebony face and glassy, emotionless eyes. His spine was twisted, making him appear deceptively short. The hunchback was wearing simple black clothes with no adornments and holding himself with avid of awkwardness, asked how uncomfortable with all the attention. His name was Haruz, and he was Bright Lord Shittenblade and executioner. When someone needed to be disposed of, he was sent to carry out the punishment. If Gunlog wanted everyone talk now about his displeasure, there would be rivers of blood left in his wake. If not, there wouldn't be even a single drop. People would just disappear, asked how they had never existed. Haruz was Gunlog's murderous shadow. Many of the inhabitants of the castle had seen nightmares in which they awoke only to see his glassy, cold eyes staring at them from the darkness. For some, those nightmares became a reality. Haruz was willing and eager to follow any command of his master, no matter how vile. What disturbed Sunny the most, however, was that looking at Haruz was like looking at a dark mirror. Despite the fact that they were almost nothing alike, for some reason, he couldn't help but recognize traces of himself in the sadistic butcher. Or, to be precise, of a possible future version of himself. No way, I am, Yamuj more pleasant on the eye. Forcing himself to look away before the hunchback felt his stare, Sunny turned his head and looked at the tall man who had finally appeared from the darkness. At least he assumed that it was a mon, and not some golden demon. Bright Lord Gunlug was clad in Astrange, gilded armor that covered his tall figure from head to toe, not leaving even his eyes exposed. It seemed simultaneously solid and liquid, almost flowing over his mighty muscles and broad, powerful shoulders. In the place where his face should have been, a smooth and empty expanse of polished gold reflected the frightened faces of hundreds of sleepers back at them. Sunny saw his own reflection staring at them and suddenly realized how small and weak he was in front of this brilliant giant. His legs trembled. The pressure Gunlog exerted on the space around him was almost palpable. All the people near Sunny were going through a similar kind of experience as him. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, drops of sweat appearing on their temples. Even the lieutenants seemed slightly uncomfortable, affected by this oppressive aura just like the rest of them. God damn, that's not an aura, that's a mind attack. Protected by the doubtless trait of the puppeteer's shroud, Sunny was more resistant to psychic attacks than most. Gritting his teeth, he shook off the effects of Gunlog's psychic pressure and drew a deep breath. Then, he glanced at Cassie, concerned about her well-being. To his surprise, the blind girl was doing absolutely fine. Unlike the rest of them, she wasn't showing any signs of distress. Sunny stared at her and blinked a couple of times. The reflection, this all started when I saw my reflection in the visor of that bastard's weird armor, but Cassie is blind, so. It seemed asked how Gunlog wasn't actually attacking them. It was just an enchantment of that strange golden armor of his. Whoever looked at its mirror-like face was immediately assaulted by a crippling feeling of awe, dread, and the crushing desire to submit. What kind of a memory can practically paralyze several hundred people just from its passive effect? Sunny thought, astonished. How is this possible? Meanwhile, Gunlog approached the empty white throne and gracefully sat down. The light falling from the numerous holes in the back wall of the alcove reflected from his armor, making it appear asked how he was enveloped by a bright radiance. The golden mirror that served him also face turned to gaze at the rows of sleepers trembling at his feet. A few moments later, a deep and insidious voice resounded from all around them, asked how the castle itself was whispering into their ears. Ah, what Annis day it is today. A perfect day for justice, didn't you think, my precious wards? I've heard that there's a criminal hiding among us today. Well, am I not fair, am I not just? Let me show you how just I am. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 144 to 144, Rite of Challenge. 1068 words. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his back. Shaken by Gunlog's serpentine voice, he was tempted to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. However, he also understood that every person in the Grand Hall currently felt the same urge. Everyone here had done something that might be considered a crime by the tyrant. He almost expected to hear people begin confessing their sins, but at that moment, a strange commotion at the doors attracted his attention. Moving with menacing determination, 2 guards dragged him onto the center of the hall and threw him on the floor. The man was dressed in rags and painfully lean, which betrayed his nature as a dweller of the outer settlement. However, there were ropes of powerful muscles rolling under his thin skin, and an angry, fearless look in his eyes that made the man appear proud and defiant. Throwing a contemptuous stare at the guards, he picked himself up from the floor and stood up, his back straight and his head held high. There was no ounce of fear on his face. Instead, there was dark, furious resentment. Gunlog looked down on the brave man from his throne and slightly tilted his head. The outsider grimaced after seeing his reflection in the golden mask, but still didn't lower his head. That's for willpower, Sunny thought, impressed by the stranger. Meanwhile, Bright Lord's voice resounded in the Grand Hall once again. My lords, we have a guest today. This man, called Jubei, is visiting us from the outer settlement. Recently, he had been heard leveraging an accusation against one of my men. A just and benevolent lord, I have invited Jubei here to plead his case and expose the criminal. We must get to the bottom of this matter. After all, the law is our only guiding star in this dark world. Despite being free from the psychic pressure emanated by Gunlog's armor, Sunny still felt strangely affected by his deep, soft voice. He even got goosebumps. With or without the golden memory, Bright Lord possessed a powerful and ingratiating charisma. It was hard not to listen to him, but the man called Jubei just smirked. That's right, I'm here to accuse one of your thugs, Gunlog. Let's see how you'll get out of this one, bastard. With that, he raised one hand and pointed a finger at the group of hunters watching the proceeding from their usual corner of the Grand Hall. That man right there, one of your so-called pathfinders, is guilty of murder. He had killed an innocent kid in the most repugnant of ways. I've been watching you and your minions commit all sorts of vile crimes over these years, but enough Isana. Today, I'll see him answer with his life for what headed. A wave of shocked whispers ran through the crowd. Accusing a pathfinder was not something a Sane person would ever do. Due to their venerated status, these men were nearly untouchable. And yet, Jubei seemed unrelenting. Gunlog spoke, quote, Ice that so, that is a heavy accusation, Jubei. Please, tell us more. The man from the outer settlement gritted his teeth. That scum and his people lured a naive kid into their party by promising him all kinds of rewards and riches. They told him that he is going to become one of them and come to live in your damn castle. But in reality, they just fed him to the monsters as bait. He spat on the floor. You dare to call yourself hunters, you damn cowards. Didn't you have any shame? A heavy silence settled in the grand hall. People were now staring at the group of hunters with dark expressions on their faces. The inhabitants of the castle were used to pretending to be blind to all kinds of wicked deeds, but all those deeds were committed by humans against other humans. What they couldn't forgive was a human being betraying another of their kind to the nightmare creatures. In the dark city, this was tantamount to sacrilege. Gunlog turned his head to face the hunters, who shivered under his gaze. Ice this true, the oldest of the group, the pathfinder, glanced darkly at Jubei and scowled. There must be some kind of misunderstanding, my lord. The boy in question was a highly valued member of my party. Will had high hopes for his future. His death saddened all Ofus a great deal. His voice was steady and calm, perhaps even a little too calm. Jubei snarled, lies. I happened to be hunting on that day myself and saw everything with my own two eyes. I know what you did, bastard. Gunlog turned to face the crows inside. After some time had passed, he solemnly said, what an unfortunate situation. It seems that it is your word against his, Jubei. What Toto? I trust my brave men wholeheartedly, of course. Who would best ungrateful Asto distrust these heroes when they are the ones keeping you all alive? Surely, there's none that vile and wicked among you, my precious wards. Sunny held his breath, feeling singled out by the insidious voice. The chilling threat hidden behind these words was not very subtle. Gunlog was silent for a few moments, battering the crowd with his oppressive psychic aura. Then, he turned away, letting the people breathe, and said, but it would be unbecoming of Meadowplay favorites in such a grave matter. And this matter, oh, it is grave indeed. What a dilemma, how do I uphold justice, my wards? In the ensuing silence, Gemma, the leader of both hunters and pathfinders, suddenly spoke. My lord, if I may speak. Isn't there a law that suits this situation perfectly? It has existed for as long as humans live in this ancient castle. I'm talking, of course, about the right of challenge. He glanced at Jubei and smiled. If this brave hunter has any shadow of doubt about his accusation, he should step down. If not, he can challenge the criminal and prove it with blood. Of course, the real culprit here is me. As person responsible for these men, any crime they commit in their roles as hunters is my foe. Gemma's charismatic smile was wide and friendly. So how about, Jubei, will you step down, or do you want to challenge me? The hunter from the outer settlement glared at them for a while, his eyes burning with fury and contempt. Finally, he spat. Do you think I'm afraid of you, lapdog? Sure, why not? Challenge you, share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave, Chapter 145 to 145, Justice. 1,227 words. The whole spectacle was so smoothly orchestrated that Sunny was almost tempted to believe in it. Of course, Heck knew better. The only thing he needed to know was whether the bits performed by the Pathfinder and Gemma were rehearsed in advance or improvised on the fly to fulfill their lord's desire to maintain appearances while having the man who had dared to speak openly against him publicly executed. And that was what this was, an execution. Sunny didn't believe for a second that Gunlog was going to give the brave hunter a chance to leave the Grand Hall alive. No, he wanted him dead, and he wanted everyone to see him die. Lest they get the idea that it was possible to turn their mouths against him and escape unscathed. And yet, a tiny ember of hope still burned in Sunny's heart. From the looks of it, Jubei was an experienced hunter, a capable, seasoned warrior who faced numerous monsters and ended upon top every time. He was very strong, with enough willpower and resolve to crush rocks into dust. Perhaps a miracle would happen, no matter how small, there was a possibility. Patsy Sunny couldn't understand why Gunlog would be willing to risk his right-handman's life in this farce. Asked how reading his thoughts, the Bright Lord spoke. A challenge. Ah, so be it. This is a sacred tradition, indeed. As long as good men are willing to put their lives on the line for the sake of righteousness, depravity can twin. The crowd of sleepers exploded into whispers. Some of them were tense and somber, others filled with dark anticipation. The corner of Sunny's mouth turned downwards. From what he could see, depravity had already won, or at least gotten the upper hand. But Gunlog wasn't done speaking. Quote. However, it would not be suitable for you to represent the accused personally, Gemma. The Bright Castle can Tafford tell us you, my friend. Jubei, would you mind if the accused chose another champion? The hunter from the outer settlement simply shrugged and said, bring your worst, cowards. Bright Lord turned to the Pathfinder and tilted his head. With his suddenly pale face reflected in the eerie mask of the strange golden armor, the murderer remained silent for a few moments and then said in a quiet voice. Ikus Harus, my lord. Everyone suddenly grew silent. Sunny himself felt cold shivers running down his spine. Why did it have to be that creepy wicked cripple? In the deathly silence, Jubei smirked and spat with grim satisfaction. Even better, it seemed that he had asked Gore to settle with the silent hunchback, too. Harus, who had looked a little bored and uncomfortable through the whole procedure, stared at the Pathfinder who had named him with no particular expression on his bony face, and then slowly walked down the steps. The other lieutenants reacted to this unexpected turn of events differently. Gemma frowned and threw a quick glance at Gunlog before stepping back with a dark expression. Tessai grinned, asked how expecting a good spectacle. Kido grew a little pale and took a little step sideways, trying to distance herself from the descending hunchback as much as possible. Only Seishin remained silent and indifferent, not allowing any emotion to appear on her cold, beautiful face. Realizing what was about to happen, Cassie squeezed Sunny's arm and whispered. Sunny, I want to leave. After a short pause, he answered in Nara's spy voice. I'm sorry, we can leave now. Despite the fact that he didn't want to be anywhere near Gunlog Scarecrow, Heck knew that leaving now would draw too much attention. They couldn't risk it in the presence of all 5 lieutenants, not to mention Golden Serpent himself. What's more, his mission in the castle was to gather as much information as possible. Heck couldn't miss the chance to see one of the most dangerous creatures in this deceptively peaceful stronghold in action. And there was this dark feeling deep within his heart that one day, somehow, Harus were going to end up bloodied, with only one of them walking away alive from the fight. It was asked how an invisible thread connected them together. Perhaps it was Astring off it. Meanwhile, the hunchback descended from the steps and stopped opposite Jubei in the empty space that had been cleared in the center of the grand hall. His face was still motionless and a little bored. Sunny held his breath. As Gunlog sat silently on the white throne, Jubei summoned his memories. A flexible armor made out of red scales appeared on his body, complete with a winged helmet and a kite shield. In his hand, a curved scimitar weaved itself from the sparks of light. Its blade was as sharp as Arzur. The hunter glanced at Harus and said in a steady voice, "Let's see what you're capable of, butcher." The hunchback just looked at them with his glassy eyes and silently allowed his thick cloak to fall on the floor. Then, Hegramaced and straightened his spine as much as could, suddenly losing the appearance of a small and fragile cripple. At this full height, Harus towered above most of the sleepers in the grand hall, losing only to the giant Tessai. His monstrous, twisted shape radiated a sense of deep, bestial power. He didn't bother to summon any memories, staring at the hunter with the same cold indifference. Jubei scowled. So be it. Full of anxiety, Sunny held his breath. The proud hunter lunged forward, raising his shield and at the same time slashing with the scimitar. His movements were incredibly fast and nimble, his technique sharpened by years of bloody battles in the Dark City and guided by rich experience. Good, has good. Did Jubei really have a chance? As Sunny's eyes widened, Haru seemed to miss the attack completely. Asked how forgetting that Huey sent armed, the hunchback simply raised a hand to meet the razor-sharp blade. And gripped it with his bare fist, stopping Jubei's strike in its tracks. For a fraction of a second, everyone in the grand hall froze in astonishment, except for the hunter, who immediately tried to wrestle his scimitar from the iron grip of the Gunlogaskiller. But it was of Naus. It was asked how the saber was stuck in stone. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. In the next moment, Harus moved forward with a snake-like speed and put his large hand on Jubei's shoulder. Then, with a sickening sound, he effortlessly tore the entire arm off. Somebody screamed. Asplit spilled on the marble floor. The proud hunter stared at the stump that had suddenly replaced his dominant arm in disbelief, not yet feeling the terrible pain that would soon follow. However, it never did. Before Jubei could even react, Harus grasped his head with both hands and snapped his neck in one brutal, violent motion. Then, he hit the hunter in the chest, shattering his ribs and sending the body flying back at 1,000 meters. The broken corpse of the defiant challenger fell on the floor, rivers of blood flowing from its terrible wounds onto the pristine white stones. From start to finish, the whole fight took no more than 5 seconds. Harus looked at his hands, shook a few crimson droplets off, and then silently returned to his place beside the master of the castle, his expression still cold. However, it wasn't bored anymore. Instead, it was full of subtle glee. After all, he had just helped his lord pass down judgment. This was law, this was tradition, this was justice. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 146 to 146, Power. 1,250 words. Several hundred sleepers stared at the disfigured body, horrified. Jubei's scale armor disappeared in a rain of light, leaving him dressed only in torn, bloody rags. A surprised, dazed expression was still frozen on his face. Awash in blood and broken, the man who had been proud and defiant just a minute ago was now nothing but apathetic corpse. He was sprawled on the floor in August and in crimson petal, reminding everyone of own simple truth. Never, ever dare to disobey Gunlog, the Bright Lord, or you'll end up just the same. Sunny was probably one of the only 2 people in the grand hall who wasn't looking at the corpse. Instead, he was looking at Harus. Harus himself was staring at the wall, absolutely disinterested in the gruesome fruit of his dark labor. What else was I hopping for? Stupid. Hope isopoison. It will only get you killed. Sunny knew all the facts, but only now had he finally understood how hopeless it was to even think about challenging the Golden Serpent. Everything in the Dark City was designed to make him and his army invincible. That was how the damn hunchback had managed to defeat the experienced hunter from the outer settlement so easily, using nothing but his raw strength. He hadn't even had to show his aspect ability. Why was the divide in your physical prowess so vast? That was because with every human in the Dark City possessing the same dormant core, there were only 2 things that could make someone more powerful than the rest, soul essence and memories. And both were monopolized by Gunlog. Only he possessed the manpower and knowledge to freely hunt in the Dark City. This way, he had become the only person with a reliable source of both soul shards and memories in his possession. Whatever crumbs the independent hunters were able to acquire would inevitably end up in his hands, too, because Gunlog also controlled the primitive economy in this cursed place. By providing food and safety in exchange for the so-called tribute, he made sure that all the resources would flow in only one direction. Into his hands. With soul shards and a vast arsenal of memories, he could make his army stronger, which in turn would bring him more soul shards and memories, which in turn would make his army stronger, and so forth. It was a simple, perfect, and harrowing cycle that made his power more and more absolute with each revolution. By the time Sunny, Neffys and Cassie had arrived in the Dark City, the divide between Gunlog's forces and everyone else here was too wide to ever be bridged. Sunny had no doubt that most of the elite warriors of the host had their cores saturated with soul essence to the brim. There was a limit to how many soul shards a nightmare spell carrier could absorb before reaching the bottleneck of their rank, although few ever did. Advancing to the next rank removed that bottleneck and enhanced their bodies according to the saturation level of the core. But with no way to advance, people in the Dark City could only rely on the raw amount of soul essence to accumulate power. This meant that within these ancient walls, sworn into servitude to a single man, there lived the most powerful group of sleepers to ever exist in human history. And this was the man Nefi's planned to kill. With a shudder, Sunny remembered Effie's swords. No sleeper can defeat Gunlog, ever. It's simply impossible. Helso remembered dozens of skulls swinging in the wind above the castle gates. Curse Edel, what is she going to pull mind to this time? I really have to persuade her to give up for once. My life might depend on it, but somehow, he doubted that Changing Star even knew how to give up. At least not when it came to her mysterious goal. Curses. Sunny was so consumed by these dark thoughts that he even neglected Talistan Togenlog's feral speech. He had the general idea of what kind of bullcrap the bastard was proselytizing anyway. Soon, the Bright Lord had left his white throne and disappeared into the darkness behind it. The lieutenants followed, with Haru's being the last one to leave. As soon as he were gone, the body of Jubei was unceremoniously dragged away, and a group of handmaidens silently wiped the puddle of blood off the pristine marble floor. The tables were moved back to their places, and the crowd of sleepers was invited to return to their breakfast. As if nothing had happened, however, Sunny had completely lost his appetite. Leading Cassie away, he glanced at the plates full of food and thought without humor. I guess there's a first time for everything. For the remaining 2 days, Sunny had done nothing but frantically gather information. Knowing that he will be leaving the castle soon, he became a little bit bolder inward to send his shadow. He spent a lot of time spying on the hunters and pathfinders, learning their tactics and secrets. He observed how guards were trained. He learned which artisans were important, and which were not. The only caste he tried to avoid was the handmaidens. He even studied various engravings and stone carvings that decorated the walls of the castle. Finally, the week they had paid tribute for came to an end. At the dawn of the 8th day, Sunny and Cassie once again appeared in the large hall with beautiful stained glass windows and saw the gates of the castle. Despite the fact that there was nothing outside these gates but a dirty slum, Sunny felt relieved. He couldn't wait to leave this damn place. Why do people even want to live here? As soon as she finished this thought, Sunny realized that he didn't actually know what life in the outer settlement was like. Perhaps the castle was actually a paradise in comparison. I doubt it. How bad can it actually be? I guess they just never lived in the outskirts. Shaking his head, he walked toward the gates, but then stopped when someone called his name. Turning his head, Sunny noticed the familiar young man with athen face and nervous eyes. Today, Harper seemed to be especially distressed. His clothes were a bit less tidy, and there were a few ugly blotches of ink on his parchment. Ah, Sunless and Cassia, right. Goodness, it has already been a week. Ah, where was I? Oh, yes, are you guys here to pay tribute for the next one? Sunny stared at them for a few moments, then forced out a smile and pretended to besod. No, we haven't been able to, earn shards. So, we're leaving. Maybe we will see each other again, someday. Harper opened his eyes wide and stuttered. What, why would I? Oh, sorry. I'm very sorry that you couldn't stay longer. But don't despair, Lord Gunlog is truly kind, and life is unpredictable. I'm sure you'll be able to come back soon. Sunny gave him a curt nod and turned away. I hope not too soon, at least. With that, they passed through the gates and left the bright castle, the promised castle they had spent so much time seeking and dreaming of. What a disappointment Edel had been. Standing under the gray skies of the forgotten shore once again, Sunny and Cassie breathed in the cold fresh air and both smiled. Cassie tugged on his sleeve. Sunny, what do now? He looked at the pitiful slum that lay beneath them and answered without having to think for too long. What else? We go find Neffis. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 147 to 147, Guild Hall. 1036 words. Cassie smiled, but then suddenly frowned and asked. But, Sunny, how do I find her? He thought for a few seconds, then shrugged. I'm not sure. Follow the sounds of mayhem. This place is not that big. I'm sure we'll manage. They descended the stairs and entered the slum, with Sunny looking around in search of the distinct tall figure. There weren't that many sleepers in the outer settlement who possessed an armor-type memory, so he was sure of his ability to notice Changing Star in the crowd. Soon, they were surrounded by makeshift hovels and people that had empty, bleak eyes. Some of them stared at them with pity, realizing that the two had just been sent away from the castle, others openly gloated. Sunny paid them no attention. Once again, he was surprised by the sharp contrast between the castle and the outer settlement. No matter how vile the underside of the ancient stronghold was, people were actually living there, walking around with mostly mundane human worries written on their faces. Here in the slum, people were merely existing, and barely at that. In their eyes, there was a more dire need and a more consummate fear, the need to find food for the day, the fear of being devoured by some unseen monster in the night. They were all gaunt, cold, and listless. The only time hope appeared on their faces was when their gazes accidentally fell on the bright castle. Hope will get you killed, fools. You have it better here than those poor souls in the fortress. All in all, it was not so different from the outskirts, with the added terror of nightmare creatures waiting somewhere in the shadows. But then, there were monsters in the real world as well. They just wore human skin. Sunny was once again reminded of how surprisingly well prepared he was for the trials of the nightmare spell, his lack of education not included. Surprisingly, there was no sign of Neffis anywhere. They walked through the entire settlement before finally catching a glimpse of her. At the very edge of the slum, perched precariously above the vertical fall from the stone platform, stood an uncharacteristically spacious dwelling. It was crudely put together out of slabs of stone that had been unceremoniously scavenged from the ruins, with many of them still bearing the intricate carvings left behind by the original inhabitants of the Dark City. This barbarous atrocity was the closest to the road of white stone out of the entire outer settlement. Perhaps that was why it seemed a bit sturdier than the rest of the hovels. The lodge even had a small addition built on top of it, somewhat resembling a second story. Changing Star was sitting on its roof with her legs crossed, gazing at the rising sun and the cursed city below. In the pale light of dawn, her ivory skin and silver hair looked beautiful and eerie. She had dismissed her armor and was wearing a crude tunic, with a piece of rope tied around her waist. Sensing their approach, Nefis turned her head and glanced in their direction. Then, she stood Yupan jumped down, landing lightly on the stone surface of the vast platform. Sunny grinned. Hey, Nef, long time no see. Nefis led them inside the stone lodge, which had turned out Toba her new residence. The interior was Spartan and austere, with pieces of broken furniture lying here and there and cold wind sweeping freely through the spacious hall of the first floor. Despite its larger size and superior craftsmanship, the lodge had been empty when she found it. No one wanted to live this close to off the edge of the platform at the threshold of the road, where the risk of being attacked by nightmare creatures was the highest. But Changing Star didn't mind. Looking around, Sunny scoffed. Gee, this place surely needs some work. Nef shrugged, seemingly not very concerned with her living conditions. Well, they did spend the past 2 months sleeping on nothing but rocks and dirt, so in a sense, even this ramshackle mess was an enormous improvement. With some improvements, it could even become somewhat au fait decent place. Suddenly, Sunny felt a little guilty about all the comfort and warmth he had experienced in the castle. He was even fed delicious fresh food twice a day. Speaking of food, Cassie smiled and handed Nef a small bundle. Concerned about her friend, she had not eaten her supper the previous evening, choosing to save it for this moment. Here, Nef, I brought you something to eat. Changing Star received the bundle with a faint smile and lingered a little before saying, thank you. Do you guys want breakfast? With that, she walked over to a flimsy wooden table that stood near one of the walls and removed a piece of cloth from it. Beneath, there was apple of juicy roasted meat. It was sizable enough to have 10 people in the castle for a day or two. Sunny stared at the meat blankly, then moved his eyes to stare at Nefis. Quote. Where the hell did you get all this meat? We thought you would best starving here in the outer settlement. She touched her hair in embarrassment. Oh, a few nights ago, a big monster came from the road. I and a few other people managed to kill it. This is my share of the spoils. Cassie opened her eyes wide. But it thought that Gunlogismen were supposed to fight off nightmare creatures. Changing Star remained silent for a few seconds. They dwarf the castle is attacked, either from the slopes of the hill or from the sky. If the monsters come from the road, they usually didn't bother Toto anything. So that's all the nearby hovels were empty. Who would want to live in the direct path of attacking nightmare creatures, especially since people who were supposed to fight them weren't going to move a finger to help? Sunny smiled darkly. That's the glorious castle guard for you. Wait, he blinked, then glared at Nefis. If that is true, then why on earth? Dream realm. Would you choose to live in this pit, of all places? She stared at them for a while, then said in a flat tone. I'd quiet here. Then, a small smile appeared on Nef's lips. Turning to a window, she added, I like it. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 148 to 148, Last Harvest. 978 words. Behind the window, a striking vista of the cursed city sprawled far below. The morning sun washed the ruins in a pale light, making them look menacingly mysterious. Nefis smiled. Besides, what can compete with this killer view? Asked how answering her words, a ghastly wail resounded from somewhere far away, echoing in the wind like a dying scream. Sunny trembled. I guess she meant it literally. With Hepit Changing Star's strange choice of habitat at the back of his mind and approached the pile of meat. Let's eat first. The three of them sat on the stone floor and ate monster meat, passing around Cassie's beautiful glass bottle between each other. It was just like the good old times, provided that those times were not actually that old, and there had certainly not been anything good about them. Almost. When all three of them were satiated, Nefis looked at Sunny with calm intensity. For some reason, he was reminded of the unseen waves of pressure that Gunlog created anywhere he went. What have you learned in the castle? He sighed. This was going to be a long conversation. Sunny started by describing the general order of things in the ancient stronghold. Had told Nef about the 6 different castes and the complex relationships that existed between them, as well as briefly explaining how the members of each caste lived their lives. Sometimes, Cassie would add a few details off her own. Changing Star frowned. Wait, did you say that there were 500 people living in the castle? Sunny gave her an id. Yes, somewhere around that. Why, she thought for Abbott, then said. That doesn't make sense. There are almost as many people here in the outer settlement, perhaps even more. That would put the human population of the Dark City at around Athusand. Most of them are fairly young, too, which would mean that each year, hundreds upon hundreds of Ofus are sent to the Forgotten Shore, with most somehow managing to survive and reach the Bright Castle. She paused, but I haven't seen a single sleeper O4 crop here in the slum. As far as I know, we 3 are the only ones to come to the Dark City after the recent solstice. Sunny scratched the back of his head and said with reluctance. Actually, it's 4. Castor I also here, has living comfortably in the castle. Nephi suddenly grew strangely animated. Castor of the Hanli clan. Hi sure, no need Tobaso and Hugestick, damn it. Sunny tried not to grimace. Yeah, he had been here pretty much this entire time. Actually, Castor had told us that there were only 7 sleepers sent to the Forgotten Shore by the spell this year. Strange, I know. Hep paused for a few moments, and then added. Truth bet old, I noticed this discrepancy as well. But there is an explanation. You see, there seems to be pattern to how many people the spell sends here. 15 years ago, when a bunch of crazy humans first laid claim to the castle, there would be just a dozen or so newcomers each year. Then a few dozen, then 100. In the past few years, it was several hundred each time. Sunny gestured at the 3 of them. Until this year, that is, when mere 7 sleepers arrived. Since the spell is obsessed with the number 7, some people believe that this marks the end of a 14-year-long cycle and the first year of a new one. I think it's plausible. Changing Star thought for Abbott, then asked. How does Castor know the total number of new arrivals? That was a good question, naturally. One that Sunny had asked himself many times before finally convincing himself to go find the handsome legacy and ask him directly. There's an artisan in the castle with a weird type of revelation ability. She can trace the general location of everyone Apperson had ever met. Castor paid her a bunch of soul shards to check if any of his acquaintances made it to the Forgotten Shore. She told him there were 6. Nefis was silent for a few moments, then simply said, Continue. Sunny did. Hebriefly mentioned the main points of everything he had been able to learn, including all the vile crap he had to witness and his own thoughts on how things worked under the pristine white surface of the magnificent fortress. Inevitably, he had to describe how ingenious and unassailable Bright Lord Shold over the Dark City was. Cassie grew pale and quiet during his somber account. Changing Star's face grew darker and darker with each word. When had told her about the travesty Ophitriel that ended with Jubei harrowing death and shared his own thoughts on how powerful the host truly was, the corners off her mouth turned downward. Finally, Heka made to the conclusion. And that is why Gunlog can never be defeated. Heka controls every facet of life here, both material and abstract. Food, shelter, hope, fear, everything comes under the purview of his authority, and his authority is absolute. Even power itself issues to give and take. Out here, Gunlog might as well be considered a god. Nephews remained silent for a long time, and then quietly said, Heist not a god, heist just an impostor. Sunny chuckled. In this hell, I see a difference. She glanced at them sharply and gritted her teeth. After a few minutes spent in tense silence, Neff suddenly said, Still, that only explains why Gunlug can be overthrown in a rebellion. Why didn't Tanyon simply kill him in his sleep? Why didn't one of his lieutenants stage a coup? After all, this Aisho tyrants usually end by the hand of their most trusted ally. Sunny smiled darkly. Ah, well, that ice because up until now, I only told you about his power as our ruler. Which is, by all accounts, nothing short of terrifying. But his personal power, Heshivered, then added in a hoarse voice. It's way worse. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 149 to 149, Dark Diver. 1044 words. Sunny was silent for a while, then sighed. Do you remember how Effie told us that he might as well be considered Red Immortal? Well, she wasn't wrong. Apart from the fact that Gunlog has probably absorbed more soul essence and has more experience fighting both Nightmare Creature and Awakened than anyone else on the Forgotten Shore, there's a more to him than that. Nephi's frowned. Ishi's aspect ability uniquely powerful. Sunny shook his head. His aspect ability ice that highsable toe breath and move with incredible speed underwater. But itis connected to what about to tell you. He hesitated. You see, Gunlog came to the Dark City around 8 years ago. Since his ability was of Nous in the ruins, he quickly became an outcast. From what I was able to learn, things were even darker in the castle back then. Strength decided everything, and anyone without strength wasn't even considered Tobahuman. Sunny shuddered. Heckled imagine ITV vividly. This was, by far, the most cruel and bloody time in the history of the Bright Castle. Right after the last member of the original cohort to conquer the ancient stronghold had perished and before Gunlog took control, things balanced at the edge of madness for a while. Say what you want about the bastard, but at least he kept the humans here from turning into animals, completely. Sunny continued, but Gunlog had turned out mad even by those standards. Because he actually began to hunt in the Dark Sea. Changing Star blinked. What? He nodded. Yes. At dusk, he would dive from the city wall into the black water to scavenge the soul shards from the monsters of the labyrinth that were crushed by the flood, racing against the approaching horrors of the depths. And at dawn, he would dive into the retreating sea to scavenge meat from the remains of creatures that the dwellers of the depths had killed and left behind. Nephi silently stared at them. They had met the abominable existences that hid beneath the black surface of the cursed sea twice, and each of these harrowing meetings had left scars on their souls and minds. Toto saw twice a day, every day. Gunlog was indeed a madman. But he was also somewhat of a mad genius. Sunny took a deep breath. And this Aisho had turned from a desperate outcast into the Bright Lord. One day, Gunlog was pulled away by a current and, once the sea disappeared, stumbled onto a mortally wounded, dying Leviathan. The creature was still alive, but just barely. Knowing that the carrion eaters of the labyrinth will soon come to feast on it, Gunlog began cutting the meat of the creature's bones with his knife. Hepaust, then said in a strangely dark voice. By chance, the Leviathan happened to die from its terrible wounds at that exact moment. And since Gunlog's blade was the last thing to cut it, the spell happened to tribute the kill to him. And that kill happened to give him a memory. A wondrous golden armor that no human weapon can even scratch. No one really knew a lot about the dwellers of the depths, but Sunny and Nephies had once witnessed 2 Carapace Centurions retrieve 2 transcendent soul shards from the carcassophone of them. Which meant that Gunlog's armor type memory was at least 3 ranks above the soul cores of every human on the Forgotten Shore. Almost every weapon type memory they possessed was either of dormant or awakened rank. Even if someone managed to kill a fallen creature and acquire an ascended weapon from it, the weapon would most likely still be ineffective against the transcendent armor. And since that damn armor didn't have any openings, basically, Gunlog was invincible. Sunny sighed. With that armor, he returned to the Dark City, gathered a few supporters, killed everyone who stood in his way, and took control of the castle. No one was able to threaten his reign ever since. And all those who tried, well, their skulls are out there for everyone to see, swinging on chains above the gates of the castle. Nephies remained silent for a long time, staring at the floor. She seemed a bit disheartened. Finally, she asked, what traits does the armor possess? He shrugged. Who knows? It's not like anyone who had the opportunity to learn that lived to tell the tale. The only thing widely known about the golden armor ice that it is made out of some strange liquid metal and that emanates a field of crushing psychic pressure. But even that is not entirely true. Actually, it only affects those who look at their reflection in the visor. Cassie wasn't affected at all. The blind girl raised an eyebrow, only now learning that everyone except for her always felt incredibly oppressed in Gunlog's presence. For once, her terrible flaw gave her an advantage. It that also allowed Sunny to learn a valuable secret. But he had no time to be happy about it. The most important part of this conversation was drawing close. He had to convince Changing Star to abandon any idea of going against Gunlog. Otherwise, all 3 of them were going to end up dead. Sunny looked at her and asked in a carefully neutral tone. So, what do you think? Changing Star was quiet for a while, then suddenly said. I have also learned something while you were gone. Sunny frowned slightly. Was she trying to avoid this conversation? Feeling heavy and uncertain, he asked. Really, what is it? However, in the next second, he had forgotten all about his previous worries. Because Nephies looked him right in the eyes and said, there is a gateway here, after all. Something exploded in Sunny's mind. What? There is a gateway. Stunned, he stared at Neff with wide eyes. How could this be? Why hadn't Tanyo never mentioned it? No, it didn't make any sense. If there was a gateway, why would people just stay in the dark city? Why were both Effie and Castor so adamant that there was no way out? A familiar dark feeling of funny settled in his heart. Trying to compose himself, Sunny slowly said. Then why hasn't Anyon left? Where is it? Neffys looked at the window, remained silent for a few moments, and then answered in a flat tone. Where do you think? It isn't the Crimson Spire, of course. Share to your friends. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Shadow Slave. Chapter 150 to 150, Hunting Party. 1152 words. The Crimson Spire, that eerie and ever-present shadow that had haunted him all this time. The Cyclopean tower that stood at the center of the labyrinth, Ormade was the source of it, emanating a harrowing sense of foreboding. The background for the last part of Cassie's vision. Of course, the damn gateway just had to bind that damn spire. Sunny sighed. This was unwelcomed, but not unexpected news. After all, Inspector Rock did warn them that, should they ever find themselves in a region of the dream realm without an established human citadel, they should look for the gateway either around or inside the most prominent landmark there. The Crimson Spire loomed over the entire forgotten shore-like annexes connecting heaven to earth. It was hard to imagine anything more prominent. Ever since Cassie had first told them about it, deep down, Sunny always suspected that they were going to end up having to enter that creepy tower at some point. After the revelation that there was no gateway in the human castle, that suspicion only grew stronger. But, wait, there was something else that Instructor Rock had told them. Work together to defeat the Gateway Guardians, wasn't this his words? Soho is guarding the Crimson Spire. Glancing at Neffys, he spoke darkly. So fat ice inside the spire. I gather that it's not something pleasant. Otherwise, there wouldn't be thousand sleepers choosing to live in a city full of vicious monsters instead of going there. Changing Star nodded. Without changing her expression, she looked away and answered. A fallen terror. Sunny's heart skipped a bit. A fallen terror, the nightmare creature one whole class above the dreaded tyrants, with 6 mighty soul cores providing it with profane power, would certainly doth trick. So, going there issue aside, no amount of sleepers could ever hope to defeat a fallen terror. The possibility of surviving such an encounter, let alone emerging victorious, was zero. It was even less probable than breaking through Gunlog's indestructible armor. Impossible, Het chuckled. What irony, to not only be trapped in this hell, but also be forced to stare at the path to freedom every day, knowing that you'll never be able to reach it. That was such a cruel torture. Sunny would even go as far as to say that it was a type of hell in and of itself. No wonder the Tower of Dusk was unpopular. Living there would simply drive some people insane. They were really, truly stuck here forever. Neffy sighed. The first ruler of the Bright Castle led a large expedition to find a way out of the labyrinth. They all perished. The second ruler, the last member of the original cohort, tried to reach the gateway instead. They all died, too. After that, no one tried to find a way out anymore. The three of them remained silent for a long time, their mood grim and somber. Now that they had a chance to spend some time in the small human enclave on the Forgotten Shore and gather information, there were no more excuses to deny it. Everything that Effie had told them was true. They were going to spend the rest of their lives here, however long that might be. Sunny sighed, then looked at Changing Star. So, what is the plan? Neffys looked at the vista of the ruined city through the window. Sunny was sure that she had already thought a lot about their future. He just hoped that her thoughts were not too crazy. After a while, she said, "We will create a hunting party." Not too bad. Despite the fact that becoming independent hunters was going to be a long and perilous journey, it was at least achievable. They just had to be smart and careful about it. Hess scratched the back of his head. Going into the dark city blind will be very dangerous. Neffys shrugged, then turned to face him. You were right. We will need to recruit a pathfinder. Someone who was already experienced and could teach them the ropes. That would certainly speed things along and make the whole process safer. Good thinking. Do you have someone in mind? She gave him a matter of fact, Edo. We will go see her later. But first, her eyes gleamed with intensity. Quote. Tell me every detail of what you have learned in the castle. Every name, every aspect, every ability and flaw you've been able to glean. Every grievance people have and every agenda they're hitting. A need talk now, Edel. Sunny smiled. Sure, no problem. But be warned, this is going to take a while. I've been very busy snooping around, you know. For the first time since receiving his aspect, Sunny had been able to do what he had planned to do from the start, gather information without risking his hide, a Sariel spy should. After months of bloody battles and open confrontations, it was strangely rewarding. Changing Star gave him There's no hurry. Several hours later, Sunny was finishing his winding report, his voice hoarse from all the talking. Is actually the same pathfinder who the hunter from the outer settlement, Jubei, accused of using another human as monster bait. Ariel nasty fellow, Hysan incredibly formidable fighter and is good at this job, but his personal habits, well. The man I say generate gambler. Hess spends all his shards in Ako's gambling den, then refuses to pay and hurts anyone who dares to object. Head took a breath, then added angrily. Some people even say that this whole challenge happened because he wanted to hunt a powerful monster and pay off a part of his gambling debt. The bastard. Then, Sunny thought for a while, scratched his head, and said. I think that covers pretty much everything. Of course, there are a lot of things I wasn't able to learn at all. Neffys was in deep thought, digesting the mountain of information that Sunny had thrown at her. Her face was cold and distant. Feeling that her friend wasn't going to react, Cassie patted him on the shoulder, smiled, and said. You be done a very good job, Sunny. This is amazing. Heblington looked aside, slightly embarrassed. Well, of course Itis. That is what my aspect is actually for, remember. The whole monster slaying thing is nothing but an unfortunate misuse of my talents, honestly. Yeah, I would much prefer to stay hidden somewhere safe and let my shadow do all the work. The shadow slightly turned its head and threw a menacing look his way. It was not amused. Sunny smiled, then looked at Neffys. So, who is the pathfinder you want to recruit? There can be a lot of experienced hunters in the outer settlement, right? And each of them must have their hunting party already. How are we going to persuade one to join us? Changing Star lingered, then said in a strangely tense voice. Yes, everyone who is worth something has their own party, except for one person. But persuading her won't be easy, she sighed, then added. Actually, you already know her. It's FE. Share to your friends. Enjoying this site? Support us via PayPal, Visa, MasterCard or crypto. Your donations help cover site maintenance and hosting costs. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report.